Namaste and greetings. I, Ramanathan Arora, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav Evam Niti Anusandhan Sansthan, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI #Web Policy Learning. Today, we are gathered here for day 2 of Gender and Mental Health, a 3-day immersive online certificate training course. This training program is organized by IMPRI Gender Impact Study Center. We are in day 2 of this 3-day program, which is dedicated to understanding the intricate interplay between gender dynamics and mental well-being. Previously on this program, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Professor M Manjula ji, Dr. Parna Joshi ji, and Dr. Meenu Anand ji provided a comprehensive view on this very intricate interplay. On our day 2, we will be joined by Dr. Cicilia Chettiar ji, Associate Professor and HOD at Manivar Nanavati Women's College, Mumbai, Professor Anuradha Sovani ji, Psychologist and Psychotherapist, Professor and Head Department of Psychology, SNDT Women's University, Mumbai, and Professor Mala Ramanathan ji, Professor, Achyuta Menon Center for Health Science Studies, SCTIMST, Thiruvananthapuram. The chair for the program is Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, visiting distinguished professor at IMPRI. The panel of conveners comprises of Professor Gumati Sridevi ji, Professor School of Economics at University of Hyderabad, visiting Professor IMPRI, Dr. Simi Mehta ji, CEO and Editorial Director IMPRI, and Dr. Arjun Kumar ji, Director IMPRI. Proceeding further, I welcome all the participants to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for being interested in putting your time, energy, and effort into joining this experience, equipping you with the valuable knowledge and perspectives to contribute meaningfully to the ongoing discourse on mental health. Now, without any further ado, let us start our program. It is my honor and privilege to invite the chair for the program, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, to start the program with the chair's opening remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Welcome to day 2 and this online international winter school program, which is a 3-day immersive online certificate training course on gender and mental health. Thank you, Dr. Arjun Kumar, Dr. Simi Mehta, Dr. Vaishali Singh, Dr. Ms. Ramat Arora, Ms. Vidita for putting this course together on a popular demand. And welcome Dr. Cicilia Chettiar, Professor Anuradha Sovani, Dr. Mala Ramanathan, and esteemed participants. On day 1, we had Professor Manjula, Dr. Aparna Joshi, and Meenu Anand, who provided valuable insights into in their well-documented lecture based on a grounded reality and their first-hand experience. They demystified prevalent quote-unquote expert knowledge on mental illnesses and shifted the focus of discourse on socio-cultural, economic, and political stressors and brought in intersectional perspective. Many of us who are familiar with the mainstream mental health discourse, you know that they're having 2 approaches in mental health. One is a universalist ethic approach, which uses diagnostic categories of mental illnesses such as neurosis, schizophrenia, psychosis, mania, phobia, paranoia, so on and so forth. Psychiatric labeling doesn't take cognizance of material reality faced by women on a day-to-day experiential level. It obscures social realities such as natural disasters or riots or conflicts or fire or accident or war. These are some of the mega events which also impact tremendously to the population, and it has differential impact on men, women, young, old, children, elderly, people with disability, people from the sexual minorities and religious minorities, ethnic minorities, because they are in a different socio-cultural location. While working with women victims of riots, we should know that their phobia about men has a basis in fact that they have witnessed killing and rape. Hence, medicalization of mental health in the draft National Health Policy 2001 was critiqued by the women's groups, and now yesterday, as our esteemed resource persons also told us, that 2017 mental health policy is far more sensitive to the intersectional reality and also very humane and ethical in its conduct. Now, a second approach, which is far more inclusive, which is called AMIC approach. AMIC approach emphasizes cross-cultural psychiatry and evaluates phenomena of mental illness from within a culture. Traditional treatment of mental illness used to be meditation, yoga, group singing, listening to discourses, painting. All these things had a therapeutic value. They have therapeutic value. A culturally sensitive counseling on mental health consequences of trauma takes into consideration a women's socio-cultural environment that came out in all the three presentations we had yesterday. So academic debate gave way to a new cross-cultural psychiatry where the emphasis lay on different contexts of mental illnesses in different cultures, not on biomedical categories. Now there are no two opinion about the statement that psychotherapy should keep into consideration multicultural aspects of women's existential reality of every human being. Now, psychiatrists use chemotherapy or i.e. administration of antidepressant drugs and sedatives, electroconvulsive therapy, highly controversial, and we have seen all those horror scenes in the Bollywood movies, even Hollywood movies, where we have seen the moment you see those frames, you shudder. So the shock therapy, which induces shock, or with or without convulsions in a patient by means of insulin or electric current through brain. Now, this have been highly debatable, highly controversial. So many countries have banned them, but I think we have experts today who will also tell us about what is the status. Individual psychotherapy includes hypnosis, suggestions, supportive therapy, re-education, reparenting, desensitization, and other forms of consultation, and group psychotherapy, family therapy, psychoanalysis. All of these are they are growing continuously. So many new wisdoms are coming, and the healing cycles, the way we see that first phase is that of enduring, where there is anxiety, grieving, loss of past. Then we accept the reality testing, preparedness for the reality, reckoning of future, reconciliation, and evaluation of self and resources, and also recuperating. The third stage, it's a recovery stage, where rebuilding of life, maximizing options, setting new goals, healing, they play a very important role. And fourth is a normalizing, where the stability and routine is established. You are again back in building relationships and community. Now, what we see is that unequal relationship, as it was brought out yesterday in all the presentations and also in the Q&A session, because we had a more than 1 hour of deliberations after the presentations. So where you see the inequality, where the specialists are up there and the seeker of the counseling, they are down below, which creates a communication gap. And in case of women, this inequality is compounded by subjugation of women by patriarchally structured psychiatric system. So focus on feminine qualities pathologizes all physiological changes of a woman, whether it is a childhood or adolescent or reproductive age, childbirth, menopause, everything gets pathologized. So it is these are some of the very mind-boggling issues about which we don't have one particular position. So today our resource persons will deepen our understanding with their first-hand experience of working with the community of students, youth, vulnerable citizens. And I think, yeah, so this is what I wanted to say about what all has transpired. And now over to IMPRI.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for giving such a comprehensive overview of the program. I would now like to call Dr. Cicilia Chettiar ji, our first speaker of today, for an address on intersectionality in mental health, a comprehensive approach. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Rahmat. I'd like to begin by thanking IMPRI, and I'd also like to thank Vibhuti ma'am and Dr. Arjun and the entire team for bringing me on board. This has been a very powerful topic, gender and mental health. I think for most of you who know, or if you don't know, we have a diagnostic manual that lists out the mental health illnesses. Right now, we're in the 5th version of it. It started somewhere in 1952. So the DSM, when the DSM version first came out somewhere around 2015, it started being publicized from 2013 onwards. one of the things we realized was that if you are a woman, you definitely have a psychological disorder. Very, very strange. Yes, Dr. Lovely, DSM-5. And it was so funny because anything that seemed to not fit the stereotype as prescribed by society was considered a disorder. Taking that thought forward, something that we felt was missing, and we thought that individuals need to be able to understand why women behave, act, think, feel the way they do. So let's move on to the first slide. Intersectionality is a beautiful concept that can explain that to us. The concept is very clear. We play multiple roles. It's not just one person. I'm a teacher, I'm a daughter, I'm a sister, I'm a woman who's walking on the street to do my job, just to do my job. I'm a therapist. I have all these different roles to play. I'm also a middle-aged woman who looks a certain way and who lives in the city of Mumbai. So being a Mumbaikar, a middle-aged woman in Mumbai, comes with certain definitions or assumptions that people have, and that creates certain expectations in their minds about how I should behave. Now, all these different parts of my life, when they cross over, when they overlap over each other, that's what we refer to as intersectionality. And we may perhaps understand this from a demographic or a sociological perspective. But what does it mean when you're talking about it from a psychological perspective? What power do I experience? In my house, I'm the youngest child, so I don't care. It doesn't matter how successful I am as a professional outside. I am always considered, I've been told, leave your psychology outside the house when you come in here, which means don't try to talk to us about mental health. Because I'm the youngest in my house, I have to listen to such things, or I'm made to listen to such things. At work, I'm supposed to be the head of the department, so I'm supposed to promote mental health, and I'm supposed to promote the well-being and the perspective of the institution before I try to talk about my passion or talk about things that are important to me. In this tussle and tug of war, what is happening to me as a person? Some roles are distinct, some are not, but they are all acting simultaneously. They're all coming to play at the same time. And for one human being to continue to manage multiple expectations, initially could be fun, later on you could become an expert at it, but there is some point at which it becomes too much. And are these roles more for women as compared to men? I'll leave that for you to answer. Because although we may have similar number of roles, the quality, the nuancing, the layering is different. If we move on to the next slide, we'll see that the areas of interest for us in our talk today, we look at mental illnesses in terms of the symptoms, causes, and their treatment. A fair bit of what I'm going to cover today has been covered also by Manjula ma'am yesterday, specifically when she was talking about postpartum cases, and by Aparna ma'am. So I'm going to try to skip and be a little quick on those parts so that we have some time left over for question and answers. We'll move on to the next slide now. Mental health or mental illness. Something very interesting that Aparna ma'am had spoken about was the continuum. Our identity as a continuum, mental health as a continuum. There are all these words that are thrown at us, about what mental health is or what mental illnesses are. If you look at all the words on the screen, they're all illnesses. There's really no healthy word out there. We could possibly consider coping as an aim or an aspiration towards health, but everything else, these are terms which have become part of our daily talk now. It's ADD, attention deficit disorder, just in case I realize it looks like ad. Everything is it's just normal. It's been so normalized if you're not functioning at your best. We'll move on to the next slide. Very simply, why do people have mental health problems? When we're trying to understand this, we look at three conditions. Is it necessary? Is it sufficient? Or is it a contributory cause? Now, there are different types of causes, but we need to understand that sometimes the cause has to happen for the disorder to show up. For instance, rape or war or something very intensely traumatic for the person to suffer from PTSD. Sometimes it's not a necessary cause, but it's enough, adequate. For instance, people who are less educated are more likely to be prone to dementia, but we must take into account other socioeconomic factors also, but the chances are higher if there's less education. The third type of cause is a contributory cause, which means if the cause is there, the chances of the disorder occurring are higher. But it's not necessary that they will occur. For instance, if there is child sexual abuse, in the case of a girl child, the chances of borderline personality disorder is higher. We need to understand what is necessary, sufficient, and contributory, because we will see that there are perhaps a lot more contributory causes in the case of women than there are in the case of men. Um, Perhaps, in fact, even when we teach the chapters or the different chapters on mental illnesses, we'll see that most of the chapters talk about how women are more prone to a particular kind of disorder as compared to men. We move on to the next slide, which shows that, which is just a flow. You start from the biological reasons why you may have a mental illness, the psychological reasons, followed by the socio-cultural reasons. We have talked about the cultural reasons. In fact, Vibhuti ma'am spoke very well about how we are not looking at the cultural aspects when we are talking about mental illness. And here I want to specifically talk about the systemic issues and the systemic issues that affect women more than they affect men. Now, these causes come together and create problems in the way thoughts, emotions, and behaviors are expressed or perceived. Now, all of these three, thoughts, emotions, behaviors, they can either be healthy or unhealthy, positive or negative. If there is persistent negative thinking followed by unhealthy emotions and accompanied by maladaptive behaviors, we are possibly going to say that this person has an issue with mental health. And we will make it an individual issue without considering the inputs that have come from biology, psychology, and the social society around us. Let's move on to the next slide. Now I'm breaking this biological, psychological, and sociocultural issues into types. Again, like I said, some of them have been covered, so I'm going to run through them. I leave plenty of time for talks later for discussions later, because I don't want to make this more about a one-way kind of discussion. So when we're talking about biological causes, you have your neurotransmitters, you have hormones, you have genetics, you have brain dysfunction. There's actually a problem with the way the brain functions. And there are two things I would like to highlight over here. One is temperament. You cannot locate temperament in the brain, but because it appears so soon after birth, it is classified under biological causes. Something very interesting that's happening is in the field of neurodivergence. We've all heard the terms autistic, ADHD, ADD. We're all aware of how ADHD shows up in young school kids. And for the longest time, ADHD has always been identified with boys, because you see boys, little boys who are hyperactive, destructive, going around fighting with people. It took a very long time for people to recognize that that same version exists in women, except that the hyperactivity is controlled. So instead of attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, you have attention deficit disorder. The problem starts with lack of attention, but with women, the social conditioning to be a good girl, to be the sweet girl, to little girls are made of sugar and spice and everything nice. Sayings like this put so much of a pressure that the hyperactive element may not be that easily visible, but the attention factor may impact her performance in academics and in other aspects of her life. Very often we say that in the STEM fields, we don't have a lot of women, but the intersectionality that happens in a woman's life is such that for someone who has attention deficit issues, who's neurodivergent, just to keep it plain and simple, such an individual cannot process so many different roles, so much of stimuli, experiences, and sensory overload, and also perform brilliantly, because the kind of success that you find in, or the kind of work that is needed to get success in the STEM fields requires consistent, focused, everyday efforts. a lot of women don't do that, and they don't realize. In fact, they realize it when they come to me at the age of 45, 50, thinking these are menopausal issues. And then they realize they were always like this right since they were in school, saying, oh, I could never pay attention in school. Oh, I used to get so bored. So I preferred singing or dancing or painting or cooking. And then they became the good Gharilu sanskari girls rather than becoming the girls who could go out and find the field that works for them and works with their neurodivergence. Let's move on to the psychological causes. It's on the next slide. All these factors, deprivation, marital discord, maladaptive relationships, and inadequate parenting style. When we say early deprivation, we mean deprivation of nutrition as well as love. If both are missing, which could be due to any number of reasons, everyone's working, or the child has been born in an institution, or sometimes you find children from very, very well-to-do families, but they are deprived of the kind of maternal love which today science is saying is needed for healthy brain development. For the brain to fire and wire properly, physical nourishment, closeness with the mother is of the essence. And if the mother cannot be there for any number of reasons, it affects the child. Or if the child has been separated from the parents. There's plenty of research showing that a child growing up in a house which has one parent but less conflict is healthier than a child who grows up in a home which has both parents but more conflict. If there is divorce and the child has not been gathered up emotionally so that they can understand the reasons for divorce, I think this is a fairly common understanding amongst people that children have to be held through the entire process, whatever their age. But the idea that a conflicted household can cause more damage than a single household doesn't seem to be seeping in yet. Maladaptive peer relationships. Very often when a woman wants to walk out of a marriage, she's told, listen, but what will your kids do? So what if there is so much of conflict? Tolerate with the man because you'll have to stay there for the children. And it's actually worse. The mother is given the cause of the child and say, you are most responsible for the child's well-being. So you've got to stay back, when I think both parents should be responsible for the child's well-being. Psychological causes, which are maladaptive peer relationships. I think this is again commonly found in schools, even at workplaces, social isolation. I think during COVID, a lot of these instances were happening when some women were so overwhelmed by their home spaces, playing the multiple roles that they had to, and could not probably perform as well in the workplace. And a whole lot of um, performance evaluation or appraisal was nothing but bullying and isolation in the workplace when you are excluded from your peers. Inadequate parenting styles. Now, parenting is it's something that we cannot ever get right at the level that we are working with the constraints that we are working with right now. Parenting is basically a balance between how much love to give the child and how much discipline to give the child. The right amount of balance is what is the authoritative parenting style. And sometimes it's too much discipline, sometimes it's too little discipline, sometimes it's too much love, sometimes it's too little love. But when you have the other three forms, unhealthy forms of love, you still have children who grow up to be difficult or maladjusted adults. In fact, we always tell, during all my parenting workshops, I try to tell parents that the loudest voice any human will hear in their lifetimes is the voice of their parent, especially the voice of the critical parent. And unless that child has received a full lot of love and nurturance from other people, that voice cannot be drowned out. And we'll go on to the socio-cultural causes. This is something which I'm going to throw these questions to you at the end of this presentation about what do you think are the causes. The socioeconomic status, yes. Why socioeconomic status? Because a woman who is unhealthy and gets pregnant does not have the nourishment required for the fetus to develop well, which impacts the brain development of the fetus and the first 6 years of the child's life, which are the most important. That gets affected, and you have kids showing up with problems like oppositional defiant disorder, conduct disorder, you find juvenile delinquent. A lot of it is inability to handle their impulse because the brain does not have the capacity to regulate emotions. And that is more a nutrition and an economics problem rather than a psychological problem. Prejudice and discrimination, social change and uncertainty. This is what I mean by systemic issues. We live in a country where we've normalized everything which is unhealthy. Uh, at some point we were talking also about one of the earlier speakers had spoken about how things become difficult during menopause or just after childbirth. In our country, it's either trivialized or it's catastrophized. It's either like, oh, ye to sabke sath hota hai, not a big deal, or it is like uh, treated with so much of fear that the adequate help is not provided. Recognizing it as a problem that needs to be solved and that it needs a big multiple members to solve the issues is not addressed. Urban stressors, strangely enough, research says that the chances of developing schizophrenia are higher in cities as compared to villages. Maybe the conditions in the cities are so much that people tend to detach or get dissociated from so many different spaces, precisely because there's so much of intersectionality, so much of connecting roles that we have to play, connecting expectations that we have to live up to. At some point, we start zoning out or we get detached with things. This dissociation leads us to um, build up build up a reality in our own minds. Perhaps that is the reason for so much of psychotic behavior being seen in cities as compared to villages. And yes, so homelessness is a perennial economic problem across the world. Now, on this next slide, I've just put together a little diagram. Okay, now all you have to look at is the life cycle of an individual. Someone who's born to a male, biological male, and a biological female. The biological male and the biological female both have their inheritance, their genetic inheritance. Now, that genetic inheritance could be completely healthy or it could have some level of unhealthiness. The nutrition that the father and the mother were exposed to through their growing years up until the time that the sperm and ova came together and conception happened. All right. Now, when I say nutrition, I also mean that when this father and mother were in the womb of their mother, what kind of nutrition that mother had. So it's a never-ending cycle. I've put environmental stress more connected to the mother because a mother who's carrying the baby in her womb, the stress that she experiences as a consequence of the environment will have a direct impact on the development of the child, as I just discussed before, the brain development. Now, these two come together, they have a baby. Now, as the fetus is developing, the fetus, we can understand the brain and the body. If we try to understand it differently, the brain can be healthy and adaptive such that it is able to exercise control on its physiological functions and absorb information from the surrounding to be used as needed. The body needs to be able so that it can function adequately in society and does not face the rejections and prejudices of society. Now, again, this ability is on a continuum. Not all of us are good at everything physiologically, talent-wise, skill-wise, ability-wise. And not all of us are as good with all the neurological functions. Some of us are creative, some of us are more methodical, some of us work well with data, some of us work well with people. So it's a continuum. We are at different levels in both spaces. This child will grow up, will start growing, and through her childhood, her adolescence, and the adulthood phase, till she reaches the end of her life, there's going to be a whole lot of environmental stressors thrown at her. And yes, a lot of people say, in therapy, or in fact, people who are not psychologists, a lot of these life coaches and motivational speakers and gurus are constantly talking about you should be able to fight it and you should feel good about it and you have to. It's so difficult to explain to them. There is a very simple concept I'd like to talk about: executive dysfunctioning. a lot of neurodivergent people, specifically those diagnosed with ADD or ADHD, have it. It's as simple as, there's a mouse over here, I need to pick it up and put it aside. Now I have the knowledge to recognize that I have to take one hand, hold the mouse, pick it up, turn it around, put it aside. But for some reason, the knowledge is there, but the motor skill that has to be activated to put this mouse aside, that motor skill is not getting activated. And it's very, very difficult to explain. And for the longest time, we've been calling such people lazy or bored or stupid. We have not been trying to understand that there is a concept called as executive dysfunctioning, which can be traced all the way back to when the child was in the womb of the mother and the mother was experiencing severe stress. So throughout our lives, people know us by how we speak. People assume who we are by assuming what kind of thoughts we have, and by observing our behavior or actions. They are able to even judge us based on our actions, because they know that if this person is successful at work, then this person is a very hardworking person. You know, those kind of assumptions are made. So assumptions are made about our behavior, emotion, and thought, not just by others for us, but by us for ourselves. So when a woman decides to take on the pressure of maintaining a home and taking the priority importance in looking after her child, and at the same time fighting for that role at work, I'd like to give a small example over here. This actually comes from a conversation with Vibhuti ma'am. And many years ago, when I first met Vibhuti ma'am, she had said this. Vibhuti ma'am's daughter Lara is a lawyer, and she used to tell us how when she was in her younger days, fighting for cases, going to police station, she kept taking her daughter along with her, and her daughter used to sit in the police station and do the homework. The idea is that I'm not going to leave my child behind with a nanny while I go around trying to set the world right. My child is my child. She's going to be with me, and I'm going to make sure she gets her education while I'm going about my work. Definitely, and I'm sure those are moments which have been very, very important in her development as a human being, as a woman, as a lawyer today. And it was because a mother decided to take on that added pressure and decided not to get cowed down by it. But not everyone has that kind of a support system which allows them to take that additional pressure. So by the time you meet someone out in society and you sit in space with them, try to hold space with them, trying to understand how they are, we are so not realizing that that person is not the person that you see in front of you only. That person carries a huge baggage across the years, genetic baggage, social baggage, psychological baggage, and that all those three baggages are piled up in that person who's presenting themselves in front of you. And that baggage, my friends, is very different for a man, very different for a woman. It's very easy for us to say women have it easy in some spaces. I mean, it's another conversation altogether. Moving on to the next slide, treatments. Again, this I think was Vibhuti ma'am mentioned this in the introduction, that what kind of mental health services do we provide? I want something that ma'am said at the start, that the therapist or the provider is in a higher position, and the person who's receiving the therapy is at a lower position. Um, it does. I don't know if it is always so simple. Even if it was always so simple, that simple, perhaps it would have been still easier to enforce healthy practices. The therapist, so many of our students who are doing BA in psychology and MA in psychology decide to go abroad for further studies. And my question to them has always been that all the strategies that you learn abroad in a white country, predominantly working with white people or working with the marginalized members of community from that society, can you use those lessons in this country? Because the problems in this country are very different. Yes, you need to have a generic understanding of the field, but you need to have a context specific understanding of the condition. You need to have a cultural understanding of the kind of therapeutic methods that will work. There are some communities where you can look at a toxic marriage and you can um, support the partner if he or she chooses to leave the marriage, support them through therapy. There are other contexts within our country itself. If one partner chooses to leave the marriage, it's going to be very, very difficult. How then should you choose to support that partner? So yes, as a therapist, your main goals are in place, but you can't just be very textbook about it and not customize your therapy to fit the client requirement specifically. I think it's so much more in the West, because so much of psychotherapy evolved from working with uh, the populations from what we call the weird countries, the white economically advantaged countries. We have to restructure it to fit how Indians perceive treatment and therapy. And of course, this is an entirely new field, not new field, a very ancient field, actually, the entire field of Indian psychology, which has completely been swept under the carpet, but which has some very, very valid methods for treatment in our country. As we move on to the next slide, I've just put some random categories, okay? The races that you see, these are the races that are known to exist in India. All right. So I've got race, disability, class, sexuality, language. So my question to you is just this. Take one word from each column. Just take any one word from each column. Let's talk about, like, say, a paleo-mongoloid with a learning disability from the upper class with heteronormative identity and maybe not comfortable with English and Hindi, can only speak a regional language. Take one such individual and then look at the male version and the female version of that same individual. You be honest and think about this and tell me who faces more of the contributory causes and the sufficient causes, who receives more of it, who is more likely to be pressured by all the multiple roles that are played across all these columns. I think we could bring it up in discussion later. Let's move on to the next slide. So what then are the implications for a mental health professional, for mental health as a field in India, specifically when you're trying to be gender sensitive? We train at I work in an institution which has undergraduate as well as postgraduate students. I'm from SNDT University. We have, I think, by far, one of the best syllabi when it comes to training students in psychology to be counselors and therapists. That's something that has been missing, something that we've been talking about for a long time, but which wasn't happening all these years, is just the inclusion of cultural practices in therapy. Like, we have something called as Indian psychology, which is a very cleverly marketable name that was selected, simply because there's an intelligence, there's a wisdom that comes from this region, and which is more easily accepted by people when you share it with them in therapy, rather than when you just bombard them with ideas about how a wife has to be or how empowered a woman can be, and that a woman can be empowered only if she is financially autonomous, and if she has probably a bank account and a flat to her name. I need not have those ideas to make a woman feel empowered within the Indian context. So training our professionals with cultural competencies required, and we have such a diverse cultural group, so at least more than one cultural group they should be aware of. Sensitivity to the entire spectrum, the entire non-binary understanding of who a human being is. So many students, I mean, we think the younger generation are a lot more open and things like that. But when you really sit down with them and have a conversation, there's still some reluctance to move into the non-binary mode of thinking when it comes to an individual. Again, the emic and etic format of research that Vibhuti ma'am spoke about, nomothetic and idiographic. I can't take individualistic, I can't take group studies where I've sent a Google form to like 400 people and I've drawn some conclusions from it and then applied to an individual without checking that this individual is the same as the cohort that was examined in the survey. We are assuming that all the biological, psychological, social processes are universal. For instance, when little girls talk about getting a stomach pain during their periods, when little girls, I call them little girls, of course, they're teenagers, so many doctors just say, "Ha, ye hota hai, it's normal, not a big deal." If someone is in that level of pain and you expect them to function normally, thankfully there are all these memes doing the round. I don't know if it's actually true, where these young women are going around and putting these sensors on the stomach of the young men to kind of trigger the same kind of pain in the boys that the girls get during the period pain, and the boys are not able to handle it. That's a good way of putting across the point that this is the kind of pain we deal with every month when you're expecting all these other things from us. And there's also this very common judgment, oh, it's that time of the month, let's not talk to her, or she's just being very hormonal about it. Yes, maybe she is being hormonal about it because she does have a different set of hormones than a man. She is at a different stage in life. So if she is being hormonal about it, how about creating the environment that will allow her to flourish, or at least be comfortable for the tasks that are being expected of her? So we need to, I think we all recognize the need to have this kind of conversation and the sensitivity to it. But if it is going to be a matter of farcical entertainment that women and mental health are or lack of mental health are closely related, let us at least understand why and what society is doing it to create that kind of a situation. This just going on to the next slide is quick points of intersection that I would like to go through. I think we have just 2 or 3 slides now. Multiple identities, unique experiences, marginalizations. So you have multiple social identities, mental health experiences are not uniform, and there are marginalized groups who will not be similar to the privileged groups, even if they are similar on all the other parameters. So unless we identify these points of intersection, let's also move to the next slide. I have a few more points of intersection to look at. Culturally informed, Rahmat, if you could please move to the next slide. Culturally informed approaches. Yes, sorry, you're on the right slide. Emphasize the importance of culturally, as I was talking about it, this having cultural competencies. I think there is a very urgent need to devise or strategize a therapeutic technique which is specific to the people of this subcontinent, the people who come from a particular kind of inheritance, psychological inheritance and biological inheritance, which is very exclusive to us. Mental health care, inclusive mental health care. I was giving a talk at this very renowned architectural firm, which is very fancy, and they wanted a talk on mental health awareness, and they called the whole team, and the whole hall is flooded. And then there's this manager who says, okay, we understand and we are with you with everything you said, but what can we do to help our team? Give me some concrete action. That's what the manager asked me. And I had only one request. I said, stop sending work-based emails after 9 p.m. That's it. And she was like, no, that can't be done. Our clients are like this happens, that happens. So then my next question, okay, if you can't handle it, connect to a 9 p.m. barrier, can you keep that 9 p.m. openness only for some people who are on the project, not for everyone? Couldn't accept that. So when we say inclusive mental health care, no, we think very differently. We think only in terms of specifically marginalized identities. But let's also look at it in terms of people who are, so it's a young professional who has a little child at home and a young wife who has to take care, and he has to go back and take care of them and relieve the wife of the mothering duties so that she can get her rest. I think that also needs to be included when we are talking about inclusive mental health care. Otherwise, everyone knows all the right things to say. The jargon, the vocabulary is fantastic. Everybody knows exactly what to say, but we miss out these nuances. And then that man or that mother comes in to sit in for therapy and say, okay, the marriage is not working, I want out. The problem is not the marriage. The problem is an insensitive workplace. advocacy and social change, I think, is what IMPRI and a lot of the guests on the show, on this series are doing. You, the participants, are doing. You are asking. You will understand this, and we are hoping you will go out and ask for it and become strong enough to change. Ask for the change that is needed. And I think I took quite more time than I needed to. And I think now we move on to the last slide. Really just wanted to say thank you to, and as we recognize that everybody is made up of multiple pieces of a jigsaw puzzle, and unless you fit all those pieces properly, you're not going to get a whole person. There will always be a damaged version of that person. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing such an engaging presentation. I would now like to call the chair, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, for the chair's remarks.
Yeah, just my only remark is that you are brilliant, and all your experiences working with the young adults and also students and youth from the marginalized sections of society, I think that have really made your experience very, very valuable to many of, because almost all the participants here in some way or the other, they are engaging with the community. So it will be very, very, there are so many takeaways, and especially when you talk about this last slide was so powerful that there are so many multiplicity of identities we all have. And unless we understand the cultural context of it, we can't make a correct, sensitive and responsive intervention. So I think for any transformative change for gender equality or gender justice also, it's very important that we understand the nuances. Thank you, Dr. Cicilia.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now open the floor to questions. So participants can leave questions in the Q&A box or use the raise hand feature. I think we've already got one question from...
Love, first one.
Yes, we have one from Ojaswini Trivedi ji. Ma'am, if you're unable to unmute yourself, could you ask the question?
Right. Very good evening to all. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the presentation. It was absolutely fantastic, to be very honest. Ma'am, during the course of the presentation, there was a part where you mentioned that there are certain unhealthy forms of love in terms of parenting or in terms of the dynamics between partners or the child. So if you could just elaborate a little on what possibly is unhealthy forms of love.
I think a love that is steeped in fear primarily. So parents say that I love my child so much that I can't see him or her go through any discomfort. And I think this is increasingly the challenge of the next generation. There was, up until, say, kids born up until the 70s or even maybe the 80s, there was an element of parenting which involved the child being uncomfortable. That, oh, I don't have an AC in the house, so what? It's okay, sleep without an AC. Or you didn't cook what I wanted, so what? Eat what is there in front of you. That provided a resource to create a more resilient individual. But the kids, the 70s and 80s kids who grew up to be parents, remembered those as, oh, my mom didn't give me this, or my dad didn't give me this, so my child, I will give them everything. Nothing wrong with that. You do give your child everything, and in the process what happens is you have taken away that training ground to tolerate discomfort. You have made them some individuals who will be only comfortable or only happy when they are comfortable, who do not know how to survive, function, adapt in spaces of discomfort. And the skill for the future today, if you talk to any professional, will tell you is not all the degrees. The skill for the future is flexibility and adaptability. We have taken that away. And this, for instance, is an example of unhealthy love. Not knowing. In fact, this is one of my very usual questions when we do marital workshops. Like, everyone says, I love you. Today is Valentine's Day, by the way, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Yes. I'm sure you said I love you to somebody in your life, either a parent, a friend, or whoever. What did you mean when you said love? Was it about what you felt or when you felt good as a consequence of that feeling? Or was it what worked for that equation, that relationship, and the well-being of both partners, both people? And not necessarily romantic, okay? It could be anyone, parent, child, colleagues, friends, people who live in the same surroundings. And just look at the world around us today. Everything is so extreme. That concept is out of the window. Am I answering your question? Parenting is the most obvious of the unhealthy love patterns that we see. Um, a lot of
Right.
unhealthy love patterns also happens, ideas which are promoted through our movies. I was trying not to go towards movies because that's the most obvious one, where
Mm.
you think that if you love somebody, you have to just accept. See, there's a difference between acceptance, tolerance, um, willingness to grow, and just leaving a situation. When I say the kids today don't know how to tolerate because they have never been trained in it, it does not mean that they're not good kids. You know, they were just not given the tools needed to build that kind of a resource, and that's not their fault.
Yeah.
Right. Ma'am, you also mentioned about the social conditioning part, like the impact of social conditioning, because of which women find themselves in situations where, they're not expressing their emotions because they are taught to sort of take it all in. With respect to how we've been functioning so far as a society, how far-fetched do you think it is to uncondition the conditioning?
How far-fetched. Right now, it seems like a seemingly impossible task. I'm very cynical about this, and I'll be very honest, I'm very cynical simply because we are moving into a very different zone. The rural areas versus the urban areas, they are talking about two different planets. We'll start with,
Exactly.
we'll start with that. Second, the progress that's being made in terms of technology and artificial intelligence. Things like the Neuralink, which Elon Musk has started
Mm,
human trials on. These things are going to become so powerful that the biochemical mechanism that makes you, that biochemical mechanism is going to be artificially controlled. So we
right.
might eventually reach a utopia where everybody has everything in balance.
The
Humanity,
perfect world.
is gone. So yes,
Right.
there's a lot of there are a lot of people who say that it's not so quick, it's not going to happen, blah 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 blah. Itna jaldi nahi hoega, not in our lifetime. Will take another 100 years. Facebook happened 2006-7. Look at where we are, 2023. Look at how the world has changed. So
Right.
things are happening like that. That's one. Technology is one of the reasons that scares me, and how technology will play out in the city versus how it will play out in the rural areas.
Mm.
So
Thank you
I
so
think
much, ma'am.
you're welcome.
Hello,
Thank you,
can I
ma'am.
speak?
Dr. Subrajyoti ji, would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Chettiar. It was a wonderful presentation. So
Thank
I am a practicing therapist for last 12 years, and I'm also working with gender issues for last 3 years.
you.
Okay, so now when I'm working with gender issues with rural and urban population, child and adolescents, parents. So with this gender concept, I am completely, out of my league, and my therapy is being affected now. So the teachings I used to have, and the my uh, therapeutic teaching is mostly, my learning is mostly based on psychodynamic background. So now I'm trying to merge these two things. It's becoming very difficult sometimes. It's very difficult that I need to unlearn many things. So after these 3 day sessions, I think I would be more, handicapped to have a session, to do a session. So, however, it's
I like that.
any
But I
change.
think it will be, in a long run, it will be very fruitful because
Yes.
that will generate, so much of healthy curiosity is generated in you that you are going to read up
Exactly.
a lot,
No,
discuss
no,
a lot,
exactly.
going to
Exactly.
make new friends among these 45 participants and resource persons. Some, 8, 10 of them.
Exactly. So, I think I should already show my face also. That's otherwise it becomes very suspicious. Okay.
Hmm.
Okay, so my question is that when I try to merge these two things, and these the perspectives which you discussed just now. So how to adapt this in therapeutic situations? So because gender is not a very in thing in therapy, so it's just coming when we practice. We understand that something is missing, and when we try to incorporate that two things, the language is changing. And when the language is changing, the narrative is changing, then it becomes very difficult to focus on my last 13 years of practice. So I would like to have some guidance from Vibhuti ji or Dr. Chettiar, anybody.
Can I go, Vibhuti ma'am?
Yeah.
So, Dr. Mukherjee, I am a hardcore Freudian. I have explored every possible lot of modes of therapy, and I am happiest with the Freudian perspective. So, your challenge with where the Freudian perspective and the gender and mental health perspective, when you're talking about that intersection, I believe that Freud got most of his facts right about how women respond. Because in this great space that we have created about how modern we are and how evolved we are as men and women, we have forgotten that essentially we are biological organisms. Yeah, so we are biological organisms. So a woman will respond as a woman first, though she camouflages it with years of learning and conditioning. And Freud has explained those concepts very well. If you are from the psychodynamic tradition, one recommendation I would strongly urge you to have is pair psychodynamic with somatic modes of therapy. It's so much smoother when you can identify the places of tension in the body as a result of experiences during childhood, and that and releasing that tension because of somatic therapeutic methods. Because the explanation is easier with psychodynamics, the working and the resolution is easier with somatic therapy. Does that answer your question?
So I understand it's not a small task, small question I had asked, but I would like to get in touch again. I had a somatic therapeutic experience from Dr. Aparna Popat in Mumbai a few years back. I think in 2015 there was a conference in Bangalore where I had met her. But again, I didn't pursue that because I thought, okay, that's different and what I am doing is different. But okay, with your suggestion, I would of course
Yes. It smoothly flows from one into the other. I'll take just about 30 seconds to give you a quick example. If a child was celebrating their 5th birthday party, father didn't come for the party, and the child was disappointed. That disappointment gets stored in the body and gets carried over for years, and the child may have consciously forgotten it. But the sense of being disappointed with people and therefore being unhappy in closest of relationships continues. That leads to problems in marriage, problems in accepting friendships, problems in accepting children. And then when they go in for somatic therapy, you work with that disappointment and help them identify it in the body and release it. Then they don't get so affected when someone or something in the planet disappoints them, because disappointment is part of our existence.
But then when does closure come? Because that's what we feminists say, that, okay, we all have this baggage, but we can get rid of this baggage, no?
Yeah, so what we talk about is you don't have to get, what we fight for is tolerance. If there is a if there is a childhood experience, I can't undo the experience, but can I become bigger than the experience? I don't know if you can see my hand. I'm going to try to put it over here. When I'm small, I'm not able to encompass the experience. As I grow older, I become bigger and can encompass it. With somatic therapy, I become so large. The experience remains the same, but my ability to tolerate it and overpower it increases.
Correct. But what do you have to say when Freud said that women and children hallucinate? Because his analysis of all those women, the rich Jewish women who used to go for psychotherapy, and they all confided in him incest and rape and abuse and marital violence and all. And he considered it to be hallucination or bad dreams. The same with the children who were confiding in him about sexual abuse or this, and he said that they are dreaming. And I think the same thing is written, quotation of Freud is there in the medical textbooks. In fact, my husband is fighting against that, the gender in medical education, we need to bring in, because it's so Freudian. All the treatment casualty ward, and I personally remember going with a survivor of rape, gang rape, to the casualty ward of Cooper Hospital and Baba Hospital in the early 80s, and they would not write anything except some injuries on the body, gave her crocin, and they showed her up. And we are telling him that this is what has happened to her. Because casualty ward people, the doctors have just internalized that women always dream or women always hallucinate. So it is all a dream of rape, but not actually.
So let's understand that Freud worked in a particular social setting. When we study Freud, we have to study the techniques of his rather than his social explanations. For instance, he talks about things like Electra complex, which nobody was willing to accept today, right?
Yeah.
So we have to learn to be able to take his techniques and his analysis. Freud talks about infantile sexuality, which people don't want to accept, but then you can sit with a 5-year-old child and recognize that the 5-year-old child, I mean, I've had cases where a 5-year-old child has performed oral sex on the other 5-year-old child, and they've enjoyed it and they want to continue doing it. So it's not all far out. It's little difficult to digest, that I accept. But when you're studying Freud, one easier way or one helpful way is to look at the neo-Freudians also. But his core theory of psychoanalysis with the
brought it
defense.
out of the violence and trauma
Yes.
and torture to the
The
victim.
role of anxiety and defense mechanisms.
Correct.
If you can take those, even just those, and work on that,
Yeah.
there's a lot of progress that can be made.
Yeah. That's what we say. We should not throw baby with bathwater. The method of psychology which brought the whole mental health discourse from the area of violence and witchcraft to the more like a participatory and this thing, journey. That is a very important. It's like, that's why we call it, compare it with Newton's quantum physics.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you.
Thank you. Aishwarya ji, please ask your question.
Yes. Hi. So we were talking about, thank you so much, first of all, ma'am, for your session. It was very insightful and it really gave me a lot of takeaway to think about and bring it into some work that I'm trying to work as an early psychologist. So because we were talking about somatic work, I wanted to know if it is more Jungian perspective or psychoanalytical, because right now you just mentioned anxiety and defense mechanisms work really, like it's evidently visible. But with somatic work, I don't know. I'm trying to find my grounds with this. Could you like make me understand Jungian and um, psychoanalytical perspective and somatic work? How does that work together?
So I'm not very well versed with Jungian, but I'll tell you what my understanding is. With
Sure.
Jungian, I find it more useful to work with the concept of the collective unconscious. So when
Yes.
we talk about women who are carrying the burden of centuries of women being raped or tortured, that is where I strongly connect that a woman who is hurt is not just carrying her pain, she's carrying the pain of centuries of thousands of other women who have been pained over the years.
Yeah.
That is where that connects with me. How do I deal with it somatically? Like I said, when Vibhuti ma'am asked, is the solution to resolve it and get rid of it? I don't know if you can get rid of something like that. It's too big. But can you become strong enough to overwhelm, overpower it, and to hold it? That does not diminish, but you become bigger. And that is what we are fighting for. And with when you're looking at somatic, I know people who do somatic and still work with CBT.
You're right.
So
Yeah,
it's not whether you are Jungian or Freudian. Somatic is a different school of thought altogether. For me, because I'm in so much of agreement with a lot of what Freud said, it flows very smoothly for me, specifically starting from childhood.
right, definitely. Like for me, it's arriving right now, which maybe, I mean, I would like you to add on to this and help me understand. So maybe with the diagnosis or maybe with the face value of it, it can come up with the psychoanalytical perspective. But because it's so collective in nature with the Jungian perspective, which we as humans absorb from the surroundings, maybe can also be a part of intervention for the somatic work. Can we see that with the Jungian perspective?
Yes, in fact, I think when in somatic, when we are working with the intervention,
Mm-hmm.
one of the questions clients will usually have is that, okay, this happened, whatever happened to me when I was a child, maybe there was sexual abuse. I understand why it happened. And
Right.
I rationalize it also. And I've had so much of time to rationalize it. Why is it so intense for me now? And then when we go back and work with the body, and I say, is there anybody else's pain you're tapping into? And then the client will say, yeah, I didn't realize it, but I've heard similar stories from whatever friends, this, that, or my mom went through it, or something like that. And then
Right.
you realize that this person is not just carrying her pain. So once you make them aware, in therapy, with
Yeah.
our greatest tool is awareness, right?
Yeah.
Once they are aware, then they start working on building their strength and then holding space for the other person who they know has also suffered. So that in that sense, yes, collective unconscious you can involve in the perspective of intervention by making them more aware of how they are literally like receptors for the pain of others.
Right, yeah. Thank you. I mean, I did take away a lot of from each word that you said. So I'll definitely reflect on this. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Chitraji, please go ahead.
Thank you, Doctor, for such a wonderful session. I mean, you have really activated my thoughts. Just going back to the explanation which you gave about the parental, the parents parents of 80s and 70s feel that because they did not get certain things, they want to give their child everything. So actually, parents dream for their child. Okay. So it's not the children's dream, but parents' dream, and it also creates pressure. So how to tackle this? This is one question. And second is, even if we see that even if nowadays parents are not ready to give or not willing to give something to their children, which they ask for or which they demand, but there are many apps or it's available in the market. So okay, अगर तुमने नहीं दिया तो मुझे market में तो मिल ही रहा है. So they take this. So how to tackle these kind of situation, which ultimately gives pressure both at the parental level as well as at the children's level.
When you mentioned in your first question, it creates pressure, you meant it creates pressure for the parent or for the child?
For the child.
Okay, so your question is there is pressure created for the child because the parents are living their dreams, so now trying to live their life through them.
Yeah.
That is why awareness workshops for parents. You can you need to give an exam to drive a car, but you don't need to do anything to be a parent. I know in some communities, for instance, in the Catholic communities, there is premarital workshop, pre-baptismal workshops where parents are given a fair amount of parenting skills. I know there are a lot of other communities where this is done. But why can't at our small community level, we pick up cases when we know that there is a wedding happening or there's a marriage happening? Why not make it mandatory? Like you can't get married in a Catholic church unless you've gone through that workshop. If you're wanting to have a child and you want the child to be accepted in the church, that will not happen till you've gone through the workshop. That way they ensure that along with whatever religious training is happening, but basic parenting skills, financial skills are being transferred on to the people who are getting married and having children. So the training has to come for the parents. We have to find ways to ensure that the parents are trained. We can't do anything with the children. Second thing that I like, this is my pet project. I wish that in school from a very, very early age, right from kindergarten, we teach children basic pranayam, basic deep breathing. We are teaching them wash your hands, brush your teeth. It's okay if the child doesn't brush his teeth, but if he learns that he or she needs to sit quietly every day for 5 to 10 minutes, breathe deeply, because deep breathing is a proven neurological technique to regulate the emotional upheavals, to shut down the alarm systems in your brain, which gives you better coping skills to deal with the problems which are going to be there in life anyway. So I'm very, very keen on somebody trying to do that. I know there's a new education policy, all sorts of efforts are being made, but this is something which is so core. Your breath, very important in therapy. So that is where we can teach kids.
Okay.
Teach them that tool. The second thing, what about children saying, if you don't give it, I'll give it somewhere else? See, we have to recognize that, again, parenting is not about having outcomes at every point. Parenting is a journey, and you keep doing what it is that you want to do. The child will keep doing what he wants to do or she wants to do. The real outcome of the parenting will not happen when the child is living in your house as a child. The real outcome is when the child is out there dealing with in a very unsafe environment, dealing with all the stressors and going back to training that he or she received as a child. Do you know, now in psychology, we used to have a DSM, and then we now have a value system, values in action, where we are saying that along with knowing what are your maladaptive and adaptive qualities, it's very important for you to have these values. And these values are love, kindness, resilience, things like that. Which means at the core of it, build an individual who has a strong value system. Don't expect the outcome to happen when the child is living with you. Your job is to give the best training. The outcome is when the child lives his or her life.
Okay, thank you so much. So
Thank you.
I think you'll have to communicate with Dr. Cicilia Chettiar, either at the end, if she's there, then at the end of the session, or by email. So whatever. But because our next two resource persons are also ready.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an engaging presentation and
I have
sharing.
shared Dr. Cecilia's email ID, and if she's
Thank you,
there
ma'am.
and till the end you are there, then you can take part in the.
I'll try to log in back at the end. I can't
Okay,
promise
yeah.
that.
Yes. Yeah, fine. Because
Thank
there are
you,
many
ma'am.
questions for you. Yeah, yeah.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. We look forward to seeing you at future IMPRI sessions as well. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I would now I'm delighted to call upon our next speaker, Professor Anuradha Sovani ji, for an address on mental health, instigating thought about existing realities in our social fabric. Welcome, ma'am. Over to you.
A very good evening to all participants. Thank you so much, organizers, for having me as part of this very exciting journey. I'm sorry it's a little late, and I'm sure all of you are tired.
No. Yesterday they were there till 9. It's a highly motivated participants.
Right.
They are the ones who are asking questions, and that's why it's getting late.
Of course.
And it's so disciplined. They are disciplined.
To reconnect with Dr. Vibhuti and with my colleague Dr. Cecilia. We both taught. I taught. She still teaches at SNDT Women's University, and so was Dr. Vibhuti there. I'm going to have a little different engagement with all of you from what I have been seeing from yesterday, although I couldn't be there yesterday, but I did quickly go back to check the videos. I'll tell you what I plan to do, and then let's see if it turns out to be fruitful to everybody in the group. As the title says, we are trying to see what is happening in existing realities around us, in cities, in villages, in small towns, in our country, elsewhere, and so on. But of course, primarily in our country. And rather than make it a very content-rich talk, as I have seen from yesterday, I was happy to see so many erudite speakers touching upon their areas of expertise. Or making it a very data-based talk, which again is often very satisfying because you actually understand in numbers what is happening in the society around you. I want to make it a kind of thought-based talk, like talk about what I thought when I encountered different realities happening around, and hopefully stop from time to time in between to have an interaction. So I won't have slides and no PowerPoint, and I'll just kind of take whatever time it takes. Maybe it'll take less than the allotted time, maybe it'll take more. Just to assist me along the way, I generally like to fall back on literature because I love reading and I love writing. So as I talk about all these experiences and insights that I had, and it's purely personal, okay, I'm not saying any of them are right or wrong. They're my insights and they're my thinking as I went about my work in the psychological domain over all these decades. Specifically, community-based work with children, with women, with senior citizens, with persons with psychological disorders. So gender steps in each of these, as you have been hearing in all the talks that you have attended. Gender of all kinds. I mean, I'm not talking about binary only, but different shades of gender expression. So what I did is I tried to structure this journey around Shakespeare's 7 Ages of Man. So of course, again, a male writer, so he would say 7 Ages of Man and not people. But it's a famous play. It's called As You Like It. And in that, he has touched upon the various ages through which people pass through. So very briefly, I don't want to quote the entire piece from the play, but in Act 2, Scene 7, Shakespeare says, of course, the first line is very famous, all the world's a stage. Okay, so all the world's a stage, and all the men and women are merely players. They have exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts, his acts being the 7 ages. So that's what he has laid down as the 7 ages. So the first age is the infant. The second age is the winding schoolboy with his satchel, his shining morning face, creeping like a snail unwillingly to school. Then the next stage is the lover, sighing with a woeful ballad for his loved one. And after that, he brings on the soldier. So I am looking at it as the workspace. Okay, so a soldier full of strange oaths, bearded like the pard, jealous in honor, sudden, quick in quarrel. And then the justice. So this is a middle-aged man, fair round belly, good capon, lined, eyes severe, beard of formal cut, full of wise saws, modern instances. And the sixth age shifts. And this is the last stage into aging. Lean and slippered pantaloons with spectacles on the nose, pouch on his side, and so on. Right? The voice again goes into a childish treble, and so on. Now, in the end, he says, the last scene of all, it ends in a strange, eventful history in second childishness and mere oblivion. Now, when I started looking around me and looking around at what happens and how gender is touched upon in the field of mental health, it was a kind of rude awakening for me. Because you see, friends, many of us come from very safe, protected environments. It's the course of our work that brings us face to face with harsh realities and with understanding completely what happens to marginalized groups. In other countries, also, I saw in my international work, for example, Women's Mental Health Act of Ireland touches very specifically upon vulnerable groups. So they look at women in prison, they look at single mothers, they look at ethnic groups, migrants, women with disability. They look at older women very specifically, and they also look at carers, caregivers of people with mental illness. They look at homeless, they look at people with addictions, and so on. So, and of course, our Mental Health Act also now has started letting this voice of the receiver, the voice of the client, the voice of the consumer be heard, which is a good thing, which is a healthy move that has happened. But my contention, friends, in this talk is that in spite of all the laws and provisions which are being very often in place, a lot of changes are happening in the last couple of decades. We have seen the world changing rapidly around us. We have seen the POXO Act come in. We have seen so many good acts come in into India. We have seen laws changing. But the contention I want to make is that in spite of all the laws and provisions possible, do they actually reach the end user? And if they don't reach the end user, then what is our role? What are we as activists, as women, as good citizens, as educated people who have had an opportunity to do something for other people in the society who haven't had that kind of privilege? What is our role then? And so I want to just engage in this sharing of my own thoughts and sharing the lessons that I learned along the way. And I'd be very, very happy if all of you could put in the chat box or just interrupt me and share your thoughts along the way. And in fact, I will create opportunities because as Dr. Vibhuti, who's been an old friend and a very valued colleague, has said, you all are a very, active, energized and motivated group. And it would be lovely to see what comes into your mind along the way. So when you're looking at that first stage that Shakespeare talked about in As You Like It, the infant, and the first thing, of course, that comes to mind is the gender ratios, the birth gender ratios, how they are changing, how we find that even India is picking up in the direction of getting a little healthier than it was maybe 2 decades ago. We constantly read about PCP and DT. And in my field as a psychologist, I have often had to work with gynecologists and work and tell them that, okay, they want to engage a student of mine or a former student of mine as a counselor in their clinic, to explain why it's wrong to want to select for birth at your child's gender, and a very important new emerging area of IVF counseling. Now, here's the first set of insights that comes along when you're looking at that particular age group. You're looking at young mothers, young parents wanting to know the child's gender and so on. Why, they question why they cannot know when in other countries it's possible to know the gender. And of course, the whole field of IVF counseling. I had a student, Dr. Medha Tulsian. Now she's earned her doctoral degree many years ago in University of Mumbai. And we were working with this whole field of IVF counseling. What goes on in the mind of the woman when she wants to go through in vitro fertilization, when she wants to have a baby? What kind of sense of defeat does she face? What kind of sense of helplessness when every new cycle comes around and they find that it's not worked, the IVF? And as a counselor, they have to deal with all the feelings of both the father and the mother, the potential father and the mother. And in our own innocence, I would say, in our own inability to visualize the actual picture around, because it was a very new field at that time. One of the variables which we included in Megha's study was trying to see how working in groups with these women who wanted to become mothers, hoping to become mothers, working in groups as one of the variables, whereas the other group would be, the other independent variable would be working alone. So counseling these women alone versus counseling them in a group. And of course, all of us know that all the IVF literature that comes from the West, this is a very known practice to have groups, have support groups, have groups where they can share their experiences, talk about their disappointments. It didn't happen. When Megha tried to collect a group of young women who wanted a baby and who were trying to go through IVF counseling, there was no willingness to share this completely personal experience in a group, knowing full well that all these other women who are there in the group are going through the same kind of stress. There is a stigma that was self-imposed in India because they couldn't have a child, you see. So it is such a culturally rich area where you think you have, and that's why I'm so happy, with all the experts yesterday as well as today talking about how we need to have culturally informed practices. So the stigma that I want to have a baby and I can't have a baby, and therefore I'm attending this going through this IVF treatment, they were not willing to share this with other people in the group. Talking about, again, infancy and the kind of stresses that a very young child may go through, and of course, concomitantly, the parents and the mothers of these children. I was in Maharashtra, of course, one of the very, very important child malnourishment studies come from Shodhagram, which is Dr. Abhay and Dr. Rani Bang's work. And they have come out with amazing papers. And I'm sure I didn't put that in my reading list because it was not directly relevant to our topic today. But they have worked tremendously on malnourishment and malnutrition in children, and tried to work on how best to, correct the scenario. And of course, again, culturally informed practices of what kind of foods the families are likely to accept and which kind of foods, which are again prescribed by the West, they are not likely to accept. And then you come back to the concept of PCP and DT. And you realize, and this was my insight at that time, that in poverty, all infants are equal. In poverty, all infants are equally malnourished. When the family has wealth and the family has choices that come with that wealth, then girl babies are at risk. And that's what the figures showed, that it is always the more affluent, the more educated, sadly, because they should in fact be the ones who don't want to make a gender choice. Moving on to the school age, education opportunities. All of us, Dr. Cecilia, Dr. Vibhuti, we have all been very, very satisfied working with the Women's University. And that was having come from a University of Mumbai, which is not a purely women's university. I worked there for 20 plus years and then came to SNDT Women's University. I did realize, and remember, psychology is a very, very popular course, a choice. Dr. Cecilia will agree with that a lot of young women do want to come and study this at UG as well as PG. I did realize that many of the students would not have had this opportunity for higher education had it not been for a women's university. And so when a question is asked of me, why in today's day and age Why do you think there should be a women's university? There's your answer. I can think of so many families who would have not sent their daughter at all for higher education had it not been a women's university where they felt it's not like the girl wanted to go. They felt safe to send, the girl to study in a place like that. And since I had already worked and, been a part of Sophia College, also a women's college, and of JB Petit, a girls' school, so having understood these fabrics right from childhood, I realized the importance of it later in life. So the insight came to me later. It didn't come when I was, part of a girls' school or working with Sophia College and so on. The same happened again when you see when we are teachers, many of you in the group may be teachers of psychology. We try to offer internship opportunities, training opportunities, learning opportunities to our own students. And one of the collaborating institutes which I worked very closely with was Akanksha, where we try to see how children are getting this schooling. And of course, our interns are placed there also as counselors. There again, I realized that a lot of young girls, a lot of young women would have not had the opportunity to study had it not been for organizations like this, which were not money rich, which were not, did not expect fees, and they were doorstep schools. Access to school was easy. Other projects which we took up as part of our internship worked closely with municipal schools. I worked with Responsible Netism, where we conducted cyber safety awareness for children who came again from socioeconomically deprived backgrounds and could have access only to municipal schools. But they were as much at risk, in fact, more at risk very often, for not having protected themselves from a cyber world, which, as Dr. Cecilia pointed out in her talk, is becoming increasingly rich. I mean, there's a lot to get from there and there's a lot to learn, but also increasingly risky. And for children and for women, particularly, extremely risky. So these were some of the insights that came to me along the way as I walked through my experiences as a psychology teacher, as a psychology practitioner. And if you have any thoughts coming to mind so far, please put them in the chat box, because I think, as we go further in age, and I'm actually approaching the last stage, the older stage, because that's been the current work that I'm doing. Okay, talking about the phase where young people get into marriages, they get into, as I said, childbirth, and, they want to choose to have a child. Again, my experiences in the field came from both practice and teaching. Worked with organizations like Sneha. One saw the levels of pain that every second or third woman in the community experiences, being thrown out of the house, facing sexual and physical abuse, financial abuse, not being allowed to work, couples where the woman comes and tells you that the husband has gone and married again, whether it's legal or not doesn't really matter. And then you also come across families which are quite well to do, again from different communities, where it is not considered okay for a woman to continue working after marriage if, in inverted commas, it is not needed. The finances are not required. आपको काम करने की जरूरत क्या है? पैसे तो नहीं चाहिए घर में. So I came across bright young women, chartered accountants, trained CAs, who could not go further in their career simply because the family told them that there's no need. We don't need that income. So, why would you want to spend time away from the family? Another harsh fact is, as I said right in the beginning, very, very often people who are counselors, psychological counselors, or people working in as activists in the community like you and me, come from a very protected background. And Sneha spoke to me, Sneha, the organization in science, spoke to me about immense burnout in the counselors, because they have not seen many of the harsh realities, not experienced many of the harsh realities in first person, which they heard from their clients. And so at present, in fact, we are working out a staff mental health policy, which will help, although they already have counselors in place who the staff can reach out to, they have mentors in place. But that is not enough, you see. There is a need to be able to understand and empathize and yet keep enough of a distance and remain objective while you're doing this kind of work with the community, which comes from a very, very different life experience than your personal in your life are going through. Coming to the age group, I'm still talking about the young adults and the older adults. Here, I kind of could match my community-based experience with my beginning to understand what happens in the gender space, because a lot of the work that I did happened to be in a inpatient mental hospital, and you immediately and quickly realize that all patients in that mental hospital are not same. Not only are they not necessarily given the same treatment while they are in that long stay care institution, they also come from a background where they have faced far more. Women, let me share with you my first impression. This must have been, in my very early career days. The first impression I had when I entered a mental hospital, anyone, I'm not talking about any specific one. I visited most of them in Maharashtra and some of them outside. I found that the women in the women's wards were far more severely ill than the men in the men's wards. And I quickly realized that the reason for this is that the women are never brought for treatment quickly enough, early enough. As was said earlier, a lot of it is written off to, this is like the typical women moods and, oh, aise hai, she tends to get very aggravated and, tends to get very angry. So it's neglected. A lot of bipolarity is neglected. A lot of psychosis is neglected. Another thing that happens is that she's not the main breadwinner. And so it's not so inconvenient for the family if the woman is not quite okay, the man is not quite okay, and he stops going to work. Immediately he's brought in for care into the mental hospital. And then he gets his medicines and he gets his treatment and he goes out. And the woman, oh, well, it's okay, we'll take her later. There are other women to pick up her load of work right now. Also, they are not so quick to take her back. So a lot of the women I came across in the women's wards in the mental hospital were there for years and years, although they were quite better. They were taking medicines, were being given to them, some therapy. Very little happens in public spaces, but what little there is some group therapy, some yoga, somebody coming and talking to them. They were definitely better. And in a private setting, they would have definitely gone home. But social workers would take these women back to their homes, and either there would be that rotating door, they would come right back because their problem would get aggravated with not good treatment at home, or they would not be taken back at all. And it was said that, it's okay, you can just keep her in the hospital because it's very inconvenient to have her at home. And my, other girls in the marriage family won't get married, or the sons will have problems and so on. And then, of course, my 30 plus years of experience with Institute for Psychological Health, IPH, where we run a humongous number of caregiver groups. Caregivers for patients who have chronic mental illness, who have long-term rehabilitation needs. I very quickly began to realize that who are these caregivers? And these are some of the readings that I have shared with this group. Most of these caregivers, most of them, a very large number, are women. They are spouses, they are mothers, they are daughters, and they are quietly bearing that burden, that caregiver burden, and they are not complaining about it, but they are going through tremendous stress. So a lot of the studies that we then conducted around education of caregivers, getting them to understand what is this psychosis, what is this bipolar disorder, what is this schizophrenia that their family members going through, so that at least they can understand, why am I having to give this service to this person who was quite well a few years ago? And how long do I have to do this? And is that person ever going to get a little better? And all of the studies which I've shared, which were published in psychiatry journals, most of them, we found that the majority of the caregivers were women. A majority of them were family members, so they were not necessarily friends or neighbors and so on. They were people there was not much choice given to them for being the caregiver. Like Dr. Cecilia said so interestingly about how we have to have a driving license to drive, but you don't get parental training. A caregiver is a caregiver overnight. till yesterday, the patient in their family, the person who's going through mental illness, was fine. And so they were not a caregiver. And today, all of a sudden, that person is diagnosed, that person is showing some kind of psychiatric or psychological problem. And now they are burdened with this role of a caregiver. And so in much of our work, we call them the walking wounded. What happens in the war is the wounded who are very seriously wounded are carried away immediately into the back lines to get treated. But the walking wounded, oh, they can manage on their own. They're fine. I mean, they get up and they walk away. So they're fine. We don't have to rush them on stretchers. So these are the walking wounded. These are the caregivers who day and night have an completely unstinted kind of role that they have to continue to offer that help. Yes, one of you has written about Anjali, an organization in Kolkata. Absolutely right. And I've worked very closely with the team over there. And they're doing wonderful work trying to get rights of mentally ill patients and mainstreaming mentally ill patients and repatriation into a normal society. And after all these years of working in the field of rehabilitation, I realized that, the typical citizen in the society around us is absolutely not aware of how well people can be in rehab. They are like you and me. They can come back and they can do the work, maybe not the work they were trained to do in the first place, because they may have some of the sequelae of the mental illness, but they certainly can be very productive members of society, very empathic members of society. So in IPH, when we are working with, we have a project called Tridal, where we are working with people who have been through long-term chronic mental illness. So we have picnics, we have film clubs, we have film viewings, we have activity center where they can make products which are sold and they can benefit from the financial gains that they get from those products. A quick sharing of one of my interesting experiences where there was an intersection of my academic life with my clinical life. So we were doing a conference at SNDT Women's University in our auditorium. And of course, my department was one of the collaborators for that conference. And one of the themes we were covering was rehabilitation of psychosis and of schizophrenia specifically. So for those of you who have seen my university, we had the auditorium at one side and we had a large open kind of podium where we could display, we could put up posters and, for people to go through. And we also had a little counter where all the products were being sold. And of course, they were being sold by our Tridal members, people who were going through that entire support group and activity center, and they were members of Tridal. So when we were in the auditorium, there were, of course, a whole lot of people like us who had been doing clinical work, and there were a lot of academic psychologists who may have been doing therapy and who may have been doing assessments, and they may have been teachers, they may have been researchers, but they hadn't closely worked with people who had gone through clinical problems, psychiatric problems. And so they kept asking, in the course of all our presentations, and they kept using the term "these people," okay, which, if you really look at it, is very offensive. I mean, they're not these people, they're people like you and me. So they said, how are these people? How do they function even after they've been through this mental illness? And at one point I said, actually, you can go and meet them. I mean, they're at the stalls, like they're selling the products. And they are very kind of open and they have no issues talking about their experiences. So if they are not averse, you feel free to go talk to them. And so many of my colleagues were so taken aback, that, oh, they are here. I mean, they're at that counter and they're selling the products. And I said, yes, of course they are. They made them. So please kind of interact. And then they went, and I was happy because they went and had a very nice conversation. They could share, and my Tridal members were also very, very happy that they got a chance to interact with so many academicians and so many erudite people. So I came to realize that, a lot of these silos that we create in the course of work in society are very artificial. And I'm just still hoping. I had this one reaction. I'm still hoping for other thoughts that some of you may want to put down. But I'm coming to the last part. I don't want to kind of stretch time too much, but Coming to the last part, where I want to share what happens according to Shakespeare in the seventh stage, okay, where he says it's like a person who's like childish and second childhood and all of that. Now, in IPH, we also set up an activity which we call Sapta Sopan. Now, Sapta Sopan literally means 7 steps. And we are talking about the 7 steps of life, exactly like, which is why this thought came to my mind to base it in Shakespeare's writing, because the 7th stage is the aging stage, and we call it the neuropsychological nurturance center. And we have had a lot of experiences in this. Some of those papers I have shared in my reading list. So this Sapta Sopan is a place where older people can come from the community. It's not a place where they stay. They can come participate in activities there and go back to their homes or wherever they live. What did we find when we were working with Sapta Sopan? And a very senior colleague of mine, Professor Shubha Thatte, who has been my research guide, and she's a senior mentor and a senior colleague and a very, very good friend, took a lot of lead in this. And she herself is 80 plus now and very active and very bright. I still learn so much from her day to day. What did we find? We undertook a study which we call SAGE, where we were exploring active aging, okay, active, fruitful, participative, aging where you're looking at very positive attitudes. This SAGE study, which was conducted, involved pulling in a lot of volunteers who could go about. So a very simple protocol was constructed where we were trying to find what is it that gives us a healthy and happy aging. Is it physical health? Is it nutrition? Is it mental health? Is it positive thinking? Is it having a lot of hobbies, as they tell you to solve sudokus or solve crosswords and all that typical, you get in your newspaper articles? Is it social support? And that was a very big answer. Yes, social support. And a lot of studies all over the world now are telling us that social support seems to be something that's very, very important for healthy aging. What did we find? We found that most of the volunteers who came forward and said, yes, I would like to collect data for this project. I would like to go from door to door, go to friends, collect data about all this questionnaire that you have created, which you're going to train us on how to administer. And you'll find the papers on that in the sharings. Most of them were women. It's not like they were not doing anything. There were women who had been active in careers, they retired, and now they wanted something meaningful and fruitful to do. They wanted to give back to society. Most of them, I can remember 1 or 2 male volunteers, not to run them down. It's the word went out to everybody, okay? And we have a lot of volunteers working for us at IPH, working with us, but a very large number were women. And then we started Sapta Sopan and all these activities which happen so frequently. We are having a birthday of Sapta Sopan next month, and we're going to have it in Kashinath Ghanekar's Sabhagruha in Thane. So any of you stay this side, I know you all are from all over India and maybe from abroad as well. But in case you happen to be here, do come, because they're very, very active and interested and fun people, and they're putting up plays in German, which they have learned. They've learned a new language. They're putting up plays in Sanskrit, which they have learned. They're putting up dances, and they're practicing those dances and all that. Again, what did we find? We found that there were more female members in Sapta Sopan. We found that many of the spouses would be very interested. The men, they would say, oh, I find my wife goes very often. I find my sister. What does she do there? I don't know. She seems to love coming there. After about a year, when the sister or the wife or whoever has gone, then they would start showing some interest. They would say, maybe maybe I'll come. And I don't know what there is for me to learn over there, but maybe I should just come and see what's happening. So what did we find? Again, it's all very qualitative, but we found that areas of interest were limited. Most of the men they were very verbal about it. They expressed regret at what they had missed in the course of their life. They said, "Bahut busy the. I was working. I never had time to pursue my hobbies. I had so many things that I wanted to do, I loved to do, but I never really could do them. And so they expressed this regret. But here was a chance to do it, and none of them would come and do it. And the women said, no, I have been doing all these things even through my work life, but I would like to do it again now and with other people my age. So they would come. So these were some of the, little kind of things, sparks that came out at me from all the community work, which I just kept doing over the years, side by side with my academic work. And just to quickly wrap up and maybe keep time for some discussion, because like I said, it wasn't a data heavy talk, it wasn't a content heavy talk, it was thoughts that touched my mind. I learned 3 things I would like to share that I learned. One, I learned while thinking about gender and mental health, I learned to look for what is not happening, to look for what is left unsaid, which was also my learning in therapy. Even when I'm conducting a psychological therapy, I don't only collect the data that the client is giving me. I'm also looking for the spaces of what is not being told to me, what is being left out, because there's often a lot of very, very meaningful material there. So that was one very big learning for me. Look for what is not happening. Why is it that, girl children are going through some difficulties? What is not happening there? Why is it that young women who want babies are not willing to come to groups? What is happening there? Why is it that women come back and try to participate in this neuropsychological nurturance activity, whereas men would still hesitate in spite of having a lifetime of regret at not having had a chance to do what they really, really love? The second learning, which I would like to kind of verbalize, is unless we empower, and I think this has been coming through all the talks, unless we empower the receivers, any amount of successful policy making is going to be moot. The policies will get executed only if the receivers, potential receivers of those policies, are aware of what are they supposed to get. Are they empowered? So right through all the talks, I saw this theme. I think Dr. Vibhuti started by talking about mutual support and empowerment for all, the women in the community. In her introduction yesterday, Dr. Manjula talked about the psychiatry and psychology, and she, reiterated that theme. Dr. Aparna talked of gender binaries, yes, but she also talked of the Dawa Dua partnership, unless that self-dua is there, unless the empowered receiver wants to bless themselves with whatever is available, made available to them, nothing much can happen. Also the preventive, I think I've been stressing on this last part about the preventive. You can prevent aging changes if you take part and actively seek social support and give social support and keep your brain very active, because as the well-known saying says, use it or lose it. Dr. Meenu yesterday, I remember, talked about, gave us a lot of stats and a lot of findings and emphasize. I think even earlier, Dr. Aparna talked about a distress vocabulary rather than an illness vocabulary. So all of this collaborative understanding. And finally, I learned in my life while working through this field of psychology and interacting so much in the community that even when there is no policy, because there are so many areas where there is no policy, if we create choices for people, there are takers. So one has to get a little creative, get a little out of the box. And these examples I shared with you of support groups for people who are recovering from mental illness. We have a huge project going on this Tridal and how to replicate Tridals in other places. How can we create more such kind of centers where volunteers and doctors and psychologists and people who have gone through mental illness and are now recovering can come together? And how can the women in that group very easily reach a service which otherwise is often denied to them? So I also learned that not only look for what's not happening and what is left unsaid, not only continue to empower receivers, because that will make for successful policy execution, but even where there is no policy, if you find that there is an existing need and you cater to that need and we create choices, and they don't have to be expensive choices, there are always takers. And as my experience that I've just shared with you in my story through life has told me many of them are women takers. So there is that desire to reach out, as I saw in my girls who came to study in SNDT, as I see in the community around me, there are always takers if choices are created for them. So I thought I would quote Elizabeth Kubler-Ross to end with, because she's one of the people who have worked so closely with grief and dealing with all the stresses that people go through in the course of dealing with grief. She writes, "The most beautiful people we have known are those who have known defeat, known suffering, known struggle, known loss, and have found their way out of the depths." Friends, I want to say that many of the women I met, women in my family, women in my community, women in my academic world, are people like that who have known struggle and who have known loss and known suffering, and they have found their own way out of these depths. These persons have an appreciation, a sensitivity, an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, gentleness, and a deep, loving concern. She says, "Beautiful people do not just happen." So I think it's our goal and our role to create that availability of choices, create that environment, create those options for people around us and for ourselves as women, and be aware that there are so many different shades of gender expression. Um, Let me quickly answer just one other question that is there in my chat box. When you talk about the group counseling for IVF counseling experience, though we know that group counseling is a strong process and requires many special skills, how many days was it done for the same group? Did she maintain the steps to create a safe space? Absolutely. What I'm trying to share with you, friends, is this protocol was created as an experimental variable that we offer counseling to all the women that we are collecting data from who are undergoing the IVF experience. But we want to offer that counseling, so we didn't even create a waitlisted group. Normally what we do is we have presence and absence of counseling, and the absence group obviously ethically cannot be deprived of counseling. So we make it a waitlisted group and we offer them the service later. But here we had two conditions where there was a group and an individual. The protocol was created, putting all those points that you talked about. The women never came. Nobody wanted to opt for a group counseling. So it's not like they were unhappy, with the lack of a safe space and so on. It's just that the idea that I have to talk about they saw it as my inability to have a baby. I can't talk about it in front of other people. This is something that does not exist in the weird countries like Dr. Cecilia was saying. So I was just citing that as one of the examples. So I think I'm done with sharing what I wanted to say. If there are any quick questions.
Thank you so much, ma'am. This was truly insightful. I would now like to call Professor Vibhuti Patel for giving the chair's remarks. Ma'am, you're muted.
Dr. Sovani, as usual, was an extremely beautiful narrative which touched both our head and heart. The most important thing which you brought out about senior citizens is that now for senior citizens per se, spaces have increased. In Bombay, more than 70 organizations are there. But they replicate the same patriarchal model, no? So women are completely matched, whether it's a laughter club or a yoga or pranayam or public parks and all. So I think that is why the initiative which you have had is a very important. Otherwise, we only have a helpline. So telephonic counseling you get, but in person, this thing that you are not getting. Only in the organized sector you see that retired bankers or retired public sector women employees, they have now started creating their own clusters, no? So, but otherwise you don't see. But that is very helpful, and all those who are part of the group, they are much positive. They are happy. They don't have many aches and pains and illnesses and all. And even if it is there, then they recover.
And they're also cognitively much more productive, because cognitively they stay more alive, and that's true. And I also find this kind of network does exist even in remote areas. So it's not, otherwise, as you said, most of these laughter clubs and parks are very urban products. But otherwise, you do find
very
this
male also, very male. Like we also have nearby, but it's only men who are laughing.
Yeah.
Women are
Right.
The only democratic space I see in city of Mumbai is the afternoon bhajan mandli, where all the
Acha.
women of the area, they're completely neglected in their own house. They are in a small flats. Nobody in the family talks to them. They are only, if there are children are small, then they are left with her. But otherwise, they are only seen as a piece of furniture, no?
Yes.
All this,
But I
I'm
do find
quoting them only. I'm quoting them that not
yeah.
as human being. So the only bhajan mandli is the only place where they meet other women, and whatever little they take exchange Telugu or whatever, they sing song, and yeah.
And that's right. So a temple becomes a place, or any place of worship becomes a place where they can meet like-minded. But I'm seeing a different phenomenon also now, for more, people from more affluent families, who may not go into the typical same space in the place of worship. It's a funny observation, but I find them now, going shopping together. They go to malls and they're trying out clothes, and it's a recreation for them. It's a place where they can meet other like-minded people and express themselves. And okay, so be it if that's the way they want to go about it.
Yeah, but for the struggling middle class and the basti
Oh
women,
yes,
this bhajan mandli is
absolutely.
very, and I think maybe that is the reason for the popularity of
I think so.
those who get elected in the local
Maybe.
government. How many corporators are providing such mandlis, no, in the municipal spaces?
Oh yeah.
And all.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. With the chair's permission, can we move on to the next speaker and we can
Yes.
take questions and answers in the end in the interest of time?
Yes.
Sure.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Dr.
you. Thank you very
Sovani
much.
ji, for
Yeah.
being here. It was truly, thank you for sharing your expertise. It was truly insightful. Now I would like to call upon Professor Mala Ramanathan ji for an address on availability of data for an examination of mental health issues. Over to you, ma'am. Welcome.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you. We can see you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I know it's a bit late for many of you, and I'm going to keep it very short because the data availability, except for, studies conducted by individuals like Bhargavi Davar, who set up an NGO or something, and then worked on mental health issues, or people, from institutions which are for the working for the welfare, either in the NGO sector or, not for, government sector, which has managed data in, like for patient records kind of data. No, the data availability is itself a huge challenge. And so I'm going to briefly take you through what is available. And I'm no expert of mental health, okay? I am an expert of data sources. So I looked this up and I was a bit taken aback because in India, we think that there is data on almost everything, no, at least in a small way. And this was very surprising. The very minimal data that is available. People have written papers, yes. There has been a whole lot of community mental health programs that has come out of Sangat in Goa, and institutions like SCARF and other institutions working for mental health in South India, particularly Chennai. And then there have been organizations in different parts of India, in Maharashtra, Pune, and other places, which have definitely, and the Tata Institute, as my colleague from TIS was, Dr. Anuradha Sovani was talking about, yes, there must be data. However, like when we talk about fertility or, mortality or migration in India, The National Sample Survey Organization has its 5-yearly, some kind of migration data, or expenditure surveys, which are like once in a year, or the National Family Health Survey, which has been conducted more or less once in 5 years. Like that, you would think that, availability of facilities for maternal and child health. The earlier, we had the DLHS survey or the annual health surveys, which were from, what we call the disadvantaged states. No, what was that? There was a name which was given for those particular states, like Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, and other places where they had the annual health surveys, which has now been subsumed under the National Family Health Service. So you would think that there would be data, right? I was also thinking, should be data. But the sad story is the data is very limited. And whatever data is there, it has to do with professional affiliations, no? So the grassroots level mental health people have different ways on different scales for screening, which is used, but cannot be accepted for diagnosis. And many of the diagnostic tools are clinical. No, so if you take, my colleague is working on looking at the Edinburgh Depression Scale, which is very popular for screening in the field level. But we are actually slowly discovering that when we apply it at a community level, no, it doesn't really even do a proper screening, because many of the questions in those scales have been either for clinical use or they have been meant for use in highly educated groups. And so they don't seem to resonate in our context. For instance, the Edinburgh Postpartum Depression Scale, my colleague is actually finding out many of the people who have distressing events during childbirth and logically should be, in some state of mental distress, are not able to respond to these scales. But it could be, a kind of, the psychiatrists, when they use scales, they want that to scales that are valid for diagnostic purposes. But at a community level, when we go for data collection, we want scales that, the little bit more than lay person who is given some training can also apply and come back with somewhat valid results. So now these two, I think the reason for the paucity of their data has to do somewhat in our effort to find some middle ground between these two extremes, And second is like OBGYNs, delivery services, all these things are genuinely available to a significant proportion of the population. But reports from the National Mental Health Survey points to the, but I can't even, abysmal seems like a mild word. The absolute paucity of trained professionals to deal with mental health in this country. Yes, as a consequence, we have district mental health programs, which my colleagues, I heard them talk about it even yesterday. And the National Mental Health Survey has looked at whether or not there is a district mental health plan in place. Now, having a plan in place doesn't mean that we have services. No, so at a district level, a lot of, grassroots level health workers have been trained. Quite a few at a district level, no, our ANMs, ASHA workers and all have received training, yes. But, they can manage at grassroots. But when we need, at everything cannot be managed at grassroots in mental health, as Dr. Anuradha and others were telling you. We need professional services also, at least at taluk level, no? For someone at, block level or panchayat primary health center level, they refer that people have to go somewhere. No, and such a person doesn't exist at even district level in many states of India. I am feeling very bad to say this, but I'm also very grateful to IMPRI for giving me an opportunity to look at this data, because it's a horrible tragedy that, like, how many years after independence, we are unable to position at least one qualified psychiatrist at district hospital. I'm not even saying taluk hospital. We don't have that. That is what the various reports tell us. There's not various reports, okay? It's how to say, a slip of the tongue on my part to say various like it is in plural. We don't have like that plural. We have only one singular, one National Mental Health Survey report that has two two kinds of report, one which deals with facilities and one which deals with individual level. That and fact sheet for 12 states. It is not like the first National Mental Health Survey report covered all the states in India. It gives a representative estimate for India, but it has gone to only 12 states. Okay, so I am going to talk to you about what is this data that we have, whether we have that data or it is only report, and what options do we have, and what are the lacuna in that gives us any way to talk any policy. Because that, if we don't have data, no, any policy guidance is going to be fragmented and open to dispute. And so one state will tell, no, this is not valid because my state was not included in this survey. Then somebody else will say, psychiatrist will say one thing and psychologist will say another thing. Because see, at the bottom line, as professionals, we all guard our territory. I don't want a less than me qualified professional to now have the ability to diagnose something, because that is my privilege. But I was looking at, and please, you have to forgive me, I am a public health professional, and as a consequence of being that public health kind of orientation, I am looking at it from a perspective of how do we manage to deal with 150, and this is a estimate of 216, no? So now much water has flown under the bridge. So that time 150 million people have to be dealt with, and at district level we don't have psychiatrists. No. So this is the huge gap that the first National Mental Health Survey points us. But if it tells us some things, it doesn't tell us many things, no? So I am going to try to talk about all these things a little bit, and I promise you I will try to finish in 20 minutes. Is that okay, Vibhuti? Vibhuti, Am I audible?
And all participants are present. Nobody has dropped out. They are really engaged. Please
So
go ahead.
I'm going to share screen a minute.
Yeah.
Yes. Is it seen?
It is in working mode. Make it a slideshow.
Yeah, 1 minute. 1 minute. Is it?
Yeah,
Is
fine.
it there?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. That is my disclaimer. I know that this is on gender and mental health, but I have to tell you that gender comes after we have data, no? So I am talking about availability of data for an examination of mental health issues. I have listened to very efficient colleagues yesterday and today also talking about gender. I am not going to be addressing the gender aspect. I leave that to your imagination, because if we have something only, then we can tell gender and all. No? So, see, the first available source for data, okay, is the National Mental Health Surveys. This is an ambitious survey which was initiated by the Government of India, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. It is planned as wave after wave. By that it means it is what is called cross-sectional data. Okay. And when I say cross-sectional data, it means it will give you certain estimates at that point, but it doesn't follow up anybody to tell you whether they recovered, what happened to them. Nothing we know about those people. But this first wave one, conducted in 2015-16, was conducted in 12 states of India, covered 43 districts, 80 talukas, and 720 clusters spread over 492 rural and 135 urban non-metro and 93 urban metro clusters. So it included more than 1 lakh of households. That is 1,152 households, and within those households identified 34,802 individuals. Now
10,152 households.
Hello?
10,152 households.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, 10,000 households and 34,802 individuals. Now, wave 2 is going on now. Okay, they're collecting data in the in 2 phases in wave 2, and wave 1 is going on in a set of states, and wave 2 will happen next year. What was the objective of this study? See, when they started, no, there was so much of dispute. People were arguing with the government. There was an advisory board, but when I look at that advisory board, I must tell you, please don't. The national NIMHANS undertook this survey, so I imagine that there were enough mental health experts in the thing. Their expert body consisted of a whole lot of biostatisticians. Okay, maybe they gave advice on the survey. So the objective of that wave 1 survey was to estimate prevalence and patterns of various mental disorders in a representative Indian population, and to identify treatment gap, healthcare utilization, disabilities and impact, and to assess the current mental health services and systems in the surveyed states. That is a very important contribution this makes. So what states did they cover? Punjab and Uttar Pradesh in North India, Tamil Nadu and Kerala in South India, Jharkhand and West Bengal in East India, Rajasthan and Gujarat in West India. In the central part, it consisted of Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. In Northeast, it was Assam and Manipur. Now, when I look at the experts, they are really genuinely survey experts. Okay, so multi-stage stratified random cluster sampling technique was used with random selection based on probability proportional to size at each stage, which means this is a way when you say PPS, no, that is a genuinely very simple, but I won't say simple, it's a very complicated method of sampling, but its greatest advantage is the weights will balance out and give you estimates at various levels. So they had not one or two instruments. They had one instrument that collected socio-demographic instruments, including age, gender, education, occupation, and income at household and individual level, and marital status. And then for mental morbidity, it used a diagnostic tool called Mini International Neuropsychiatric Inventory. The Mini, both the adult version and the Mini Kid version for adults and older children and adolescents respectively. And this is a diagnostic tool, but its efficiency I will talk about. Questionnaires were also available for tobacco use because they were trying to look at whether addiction brought about mental health problems and to screen for epilepsy, intellectual disability, and ASD, autism spectrum disorders were also included. Then they looked at, like we usually do, healthcare utilization at the assessment of disability. They used a modified Sheehan scale, and socio-demographic impact on illness were also included in this survey. So what did they find? Any mental disorder in that survey, 10.6%. 10 point. That means if you take 10 people, at least one is suffering from a mental health disorder according to the using of that Mini among adult and adolescent population in 2015-16 period. Now, this tool is matching for the ISD and the DSM categories. So it's really very valid in terms of identifying many disorders, mental disorders. They, I think, included 16, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, 14 is reported here. Maybe other numbers were very small and didn't get reported. But substance abuse, alcohol use disorder, tobacco use disorder. Can you see the numbers? They were huge numbers. Like it's even higher. So 1/8 of everybody suffers from tobacco use disorder. And then you have the smaller numbers for neurotic stress related disorders and so forth. This is the findings from this survey. So this is what it looks like. The National Mental Health Survey of India, prevalence, patterns, and outcomes. I didn't even give you the URL because this data today is dated. Okay, one. Second is anybody who wants can access it by just Googling it, you will get the reports. The second one I told you, mental health systems, the National Mental Health Survey of India 2015-16. This is the second report that they published, which is also available. Then they have fact sheets, state-wise fact sheets like this. Now, they have designed Wave 2, which addresses a lot of the limitations that were pointed out in Wave 1. So, while it will continue to provide estimates of prevalence of mental health problems, it also will provide pool estimates at national level and prevalence of psychosis at national level and provide estimates at the state and national level for anxiety disorders, mood disorders, substance use disorders. But the earlier one did not do somatoform disorders, illness anxiety disorders, and internet and gaming disorders, including technology addiction, which has become an issue, addiction, which has become an issue now. And it also will provide estimates of screener positives for epilepsy and behavioral and cognitive problems. Now, having said that, I need to tell you that this data is not available in the public domain. Okay. Wave 1, Wave 2 is still going on. Wave 1 is not available in the public domain. Only the reports are. And there have been criticisms of this National Mental Health Survey. And when I think about it, the Government of India's Ministry of Health and Family Welfare insists on making available the data from surveys as open access for researchers to use. But the National Mental Health Survey data has never been available. I suspect two possibilities. One is that the data requires expert use and they are not able to release it to public because of the kind of labeling that can happen. Second is, it is very difficult to remove any identifiers from the data and therefore they are scared of releasing it in the public domain. Or one can be very mean-minded and say that it was very harboring the data for their own analysis to produce, but I don't think government will allow anyone to get away with it. So I suspect it is the stigma that is potent. Now, as I told you, wave 2, this is there. But the longitude, this National Mental Health Survey actually uses an excellent and strong diagnostic tool that is valid as per ICD and DSM categories. So that is the beauty of its diagnosis, meaning that psychiatrists will not dispute it. However, there is some criticism that when they went for about a 0.4% retesting, they could, when they did retesting, I think only about 60 or 40% of that proved to be sensitive on test-retest procedure. So now that is a very serious limitation pointed out by other psychiatrists, and that has also been published. So on the one hand, it has used a diagnostic tool, but on the other hand, that diagnostic tool has not had its validity or sensitivity established even from within this own data. The second one where some mental health cognitive disorders are covered is the Longitudinal Aging Survey of India, Wave 1. And now when I say this, this uses instruments, but these are screening instruments and not diagnostic instruments to look at cognitive impairment. So the study includes only people who are aged 45 and above. So it is not representative of even adult population. Now, that is another thing you have to remember. But lastly is to look at adult health and aging in India to provide data that are internationally harmonized with shared data across the country to enable cross-national comparisons and look at how cultures and policies influence aging. So it's not a mental health study, it is an aging study. It provides data to research community in a timely manner. Wave 1 is available in public domain. It has a strong foundation for national and state level policy making and aims to provide information that will affect development of programs and policies and on population behaviors, health outcomes for aged population and give us able multidisciplinary researchers to look at the evidence and come up with studies that inform policy. So this is what it looks like. It's a very heavy report. Now, I will tell you this. I told you the sampling for that. This is conducted in 35 states and union territories from April 2017 to December 2018. Again, it used a multi-state stratified area probability cluster sampling design, but the population was larger. It had 65,506 households, and from that, it had 3,17,000 population aged 45 and above included in the study. And this one assessed cognition across 5 domains. So it looks at, because it is aging, it looked at cognition, that is memory, orientation, arithmetic, executive function, and object naming. And it developed a mean cognitive score for those aged above 45, and it was estimated to be 25. It assessed depression, now at least some mental health, the CESD scale for identifying presence of depressive symptoms, and this CD small short form for diagnosing probable major depression. So it used one diagnostic tool and one screening tool. Okay. And this is the composite cognitive score for people, male and female. They are marked here. Age 45 to 59 and age 60 and above. You can definitely see that there is some variation by sex, but rural, urban, some variations. This is what the LASI data gives you on composite cognitive score. Now comes the difference in these two. Now, LASI wave is not representative of adult population, whereas National Mental Health Survey is representative of adult population, but the data is not publicly available. Publications are restricted to a small core group within NIMHANS. It has limitations because it was not publicly available, and therefore many people have not taken the data and come up with publications. Used the MINI, a standardized validated tool for diagnostics of at least 17 mental health conditions, but publicly available it is not. Could be because of the nature of the study and the potential stigma. Now, LASI Wave 2 is publicly available. Publications are widespread beyond the core group, but there is another problem with this kind of data, okay? When some expert takes the data and analyzes it, they understand the limitations of the two scales. Remember, I mentioned these two scales. They understand its limitations, its sensitivity and specificity when used in a community level context, and will make adjustments for that when they report it. But when people, everyone uses that data, all kinds of evidence gets created. Whether it is valid or not, we'll never know. The stigma associated is less for sure in this, possibly because mental health status is depression is just part of a larger assessment of elderly health. So I'm giving you an example of what I meant. Look at it. Social exclusion and mental health. No, it is published in the BMC Psychiatry. Now, why did I give you this? They just take the data and analyze it looking at this CESD score. And then they do multivariate modeling. Now, the issue is there is, when I read this paper, not enough discussion on the validation of the scales, its importance, how we should read the scale, how we should look at mental health status as measured by the scale. There's absolutely no discussion. And maybe that is why, the other data is not available in the public domain. I don't know people from NIMHANS, so I have no idea why it is not in the public domain, but I can only second guess them. But that is it. That is the data that is available that I could find. There could be other data with, institutions working on mental health. But that data is only as publications, The data is not publicly available. Therefore, I am not citing them as data sources for you to, work on to look at mental health. Having said that, I would encourage all of you to at least look through these reports, because at least for 12 states, there is some data in the fact sheets and the reports. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an insightful discussion. I would now like to invite Professor Vibhuti Patelji to give the chair's remarks. Ma'am, you're muted.
Mala's foolproof lecture doesn't leave much scope, but my problem is that about definitional conceptual biases. Are there any conceptual biases while collecting data or coming up with the indicators? Would you see that from the gender lens? Or any operational biases that you would see?
I think there could be. However, I am not a mental health expert. the consequence is, it's only now that my colleagues have stopped. Whenever we take any of these scales, even when my students have used it for looking at depression and all, we have come back with either very low estimates, especially postpartum depression I'm talking about, very low estimates when compared to other countries. Okay. Then we started, my colleagues and I at the public health school have started doubting its applicability. See, what happens is somebody goes and validates the instrument using a clinical mind.
That's
but
right.
when we go to the community and we, it may be validated linguistically also.
Correct.
No? But it doesn't behoove a woman to say yes to some question. Okay.
Correct.
Do you sit and stare at some open space for more than some time? Something like this, one statement is there.
Giving a blank look, yeah.
Yeah. But that we can say that, no, क्या आप बैठ के घंटों भर कोई जो चीज है ही नहीं उसको देखने की सोच में बैठे रहते हैं, तो इसका लोग क्या जवाब देंगे? In a society where women are not, Dr. Vibhuti and my colleagues, I don't know, but in the years we were growing up, and I don't think it has changed, we were not even allowed to sit down for long.
Correct.
They will say women should be seen doing something.
Correct. Same in our community, Gujarat. Same.
So if that is like that,
so why I'm saying that, no, it's a whole controversy about the IQ, no, because the way the scales for intelligent quotients, no, such strong.
No, I'm talking about something as basic as depression.
Yeah, yeah.
No, where we diagnose more women as having depression but not seeking care. That's another thing, the National Mental Health, the phenomenal gap between people with mental health needs and
the
using services.
Services, correct. Services. No, but even about the happiness index also, when they say that Tibet is the country with the highest happiness index, but if you ask the women, we were there in the meeting of SARC, where women were reporting rampant alcoholism and domestic violence. So in the indicators itself, they haven't included domestic violence. When they decide.
No, they never do.
Yeah. So
IPV
then you have a
is
bias.
never a part of
No. They said maybe happiness for men because you get drunk. Women are overworked in Tibet. They are doing all collection of fuel, fodder, water, animal care. They are climbing up and down in the mountainous terrain, and they get beaten up at night by the alcoholic people.
No, my colleague is actually asking about domestic violence, and we were trying to take the WHO thing and show the picture. No, ki, are you this woman or that woman? Multiple points. But what he says is, when he went into the community to look at depression, I'm going, getting the correct words are very difficult. Okay. So the person is like you and me, no, in front. Okay. So the person is asking, and the other person is telling, no, I am okay, nothing, I'm not sad or anything. But then they are telling about that person that he drinks. Can you see me? I'm visible, no? He drinks at night from behind the head. So much of the information is transmitted. He was telling me for 10 minutes through gestures.
Okay, yeah.
रात को सोने नहीं देता है, तो दारू पीने, if he drinks, he beats me. So this is told entirely like silent film. So there is smile, but it is told as silent film so that hearing person, because in rural India, no, how much ever you hide, and we sent 2-3 people and told that take the people out and do this and that, anything. Women are so scared. So they are talking, but not talking, So we have to really rework our premises, because today what my colleague told me was a revelation. Meaning, 10-15 minutes talk is with lot of talk. 10-15 minutes, one conversation is like and which is understood by talker and
the
listener person.
Not
All
by
about IPV. All
by
about IPV.
IPV. Okay, IPV.
Okay. So, should we not check our premises?
And also corroborate with the qualitative studies, both. Even the government should do it. If they can do it for time utilization, why can't for
Vibhuti,
mental?
I'm very skeptical, because when I go to these various institutions which support studies, they want a mixed method study. Okay, so they want a quantitative and they want a qualitative component, which I'm very happy that people have started talking like that. But that qualitative component, after giving 2 years for quantitative, they will give 3 months for qualitative. Where people go and tell, are you feeling sad? And no narrative. Okay, yes, no. And that becomes, and some young student working with some big person does that analysis and gives a 40-page report of that qualitative study.
No,
Which, no, I'm telling you, this is the kind of...
not that kind of thing. It's meta.
It has to be, we need to din it into the heads of policymakers that also qualitative research is also a science. It needs time. You cannot, hasten it to get decent results and then, try to quantify it in terms of percentages kind of thing.
No, you can.
And
there are many comments, and I think this thing in the chat box. If those who have written want to speak, please.
Yeah,
I can't see that.
Snehil Rathod,
you
Ojaswini Trivedi, Meenu Anand, Shruti Nayak.
I am trying to find. It is a
They will
Q&A.
unmute and speak. Don't worry. Subhra Smita. Yeah, Mr. Yeah, you have raised hand. No, please go ahead. Unmute and speak.
Speaking, I can't hear.
Yes, I'm just trying to unmute. Hello, so I come from Assam and I have done a lot of research in the field in Assam, in remote parts of Assam and Meghalaya. And there was this one research that I had to do in very interior part of Assam. On the A&M workers. So the collaboration around the different interventions were missing throughout. Like, forget about though the project was on vaccines and everything, there was one different project. I looked at it that so much of awareness, so much of hesitancy is there, for the people as well as the healthcare practitioners as well. From, you talk about the A&M workers, the ASHA workers, the kind of vocabulary that is there, what is the right way to talk about in the more cultural context. So I completely agree with what you are saying, and the fact that there are a lot of interventions that still needed to be there. The same way when I was doing this research in Meghalaya, there are lot many places that didn't have an NGO to begin with. Yes, I was doing that research. I knew I had to go back. But the fact that, what would be done, if there could be any step that could be taken, there's always, that helplessness that I was completely feeling. Because firstly, there was lack of awareness around it. That hesitancy was completely there. And the fact that it was either seen as a disease, any form of mental disturbance or anything that women were facing. And it's an assumption that because Meghalaya is a matrilineal community, so it's an assumption that, it's matrilineal, that means women are better off, which is actually not the case. So what I'm trying to say is that, yes, any sort of data, anything there, when it's tied up together, there are a lot of loopholes, back and forth. And I completely agree with what you're saying. So what kind of interventions do you think are further needed to make sure that we are heading the right way?
I think first, we need to have data that speaks to policymakers at state level? No, at least to start with, because these small studies which we do makes us very conscious of the problem. But, a problem at this level cannot be solved with a few of us. We need our primary health centers to incorporate a mental health program with appropriate referrals at multiple levels, and those referrals need to be met. We cannot have, people with mental health problems, आप जहां पर हो वहां पे रहो, क्योंकि हम कुछ नहीं करेंगे. No, it's one side creating demand, okay? But if there is no supply, what is the point in creating demand? वो जैसे है, see, right now somebody has been telling me that we need to refer this lady to hospital, but to go to hospital, which is 65 kilometers away, she has to walk 2 kilometers, take a tempo to reach town, which is 10 kilometers. Then uske baad 3 bus. Then last bit, no, if you arrive in bus stand, district bus stand, from there the mental health facility, you have to again take auto. Whom we are telling this to? We are telling this to tribal woman who is living in remote hamlet. Now, yadi this is the situation, the Asha worker and A&M who know that she has postpartum depression are telling that she will only become more sad.
That whole journey itself.
Yeah, am I making any sense?
Yeah,
I know.
Yes, you are.
Absolutely, ma'am.
Can we blame that Asha madam, Asha Chichi? Sorry, Asha Chichi is Malayalam.
Asha Didi.
Can we blame her?
No.
No. So the people came back crying, but they said, we cannot, we are like, what can a community medicine doctor do?
Exactly.
Asha worker is doing what she can. And she says that when I think the time now, child is also sick. If I tell her she has to go these 65 kilometers, she will be more sad. So I will wait for correct opportunity and slowly tell her that she has this condition, which is I think, and the community trusts the Ashas. And Asha has such a tremendous bond with. So we had to walk away trusting Asha, no? And we can sit and fight. I mean, like this issue came to me because I'm also ethicist. And I was like, what is the answer?
Yeah.
No, नहीं, अभी 65 kilometers जाके अपना ख्याल रखो. मुझ में वो हिम्मत है ही नहीं.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I'm not coming with any answers. We need to find, yes, we need to create specialists, but till we create specialists, no, we have to have at least psychologists,
local
taluk level. We need to have something. I know that in North Bengal, no, after so much struggle, we have one counselor at one district level. Situation is like that. In this country, I don't know.
And how much they are paying to that counselor? That's also.
Yes, yes, sir, I get that also. Because under NHM, no, there is limit to what? So they have put one counselor using NHM ka
honorarium, not wages.
वो आदमी see, it will be one young fellow, I understand. जब तक वो experience लिखेगा, वहाँ बैठेगा, he is supportive and very kind. But कब तक? Because उसको अच्छा नौकरी मिल गया, permanently भाग जाएगा.
Exactly, ma'am. We have a system in the district mental health program in West Bengal. There are block counselors, 2 counselors for each block. So They are from sociology and history and psychology backgrounds. I said psychology backgrounds are, I think, 10%, mostly from sociology and history backgrounds. Appointed in 2008, they did receive training of 6 to 7 days in this whole 13-14 years, and they are expected to deliver counseling service to the clients. And when I approached the government for the training program, they said, who said that there is a gap? There is no gap. We don't need that.
Sir, you should show them the National Mental Health Report.
Yeah, this is what I am going back to them again. I would be going. Thank you very much for sharing this.
Yeah. Tamogni Das.
Yes. So, ma'am, my question was to Anuradha, ma'am. But anyways, I think, okay.
Anuradha ma'am is there. She's very
Yes. So, ma'am, I have been a caregiver to my father for past 6 years, who was a patient of frontotemporal dementia and depression. And overnight, as you said, my mother and I became caregivers to him. And the situation was not just stressful for us, but when you are literally tackling with a problem for such a long period of time, the line between distress and illness is very thin, even for the caregivers. So, for instance, there were many moments of weaknesses and anxiety that we went through as caregivers. And sometimes it was very difficult for us to gauge that whether it was just another stressful situation or we are also falling into the trap of mental health illness. So my question to you is that, what kind of mental health support we can extend to caregivers, because I feel that there is still a lot of discussion that needs to happen for the caregivers, who play a very important role, or they are the primary sources of extending mental health support to patients. We are definitely talking about the structures and the institutions and the interventions that can take place on the part of the state. But I feel that families come first in such situations. And in a situation like mine, what kind of interventions can actually help the caregivers to build that kind of mental health support system for themselves first, before they extend that care to their patients or their loved ones who is suffering from a situation like this?
That's a very genuine question. Thank you for it. And in fact, working with old people, working with those who are facing neuropsychological issues as a part of aging is perhaps one of the most draining role of a caregiver. Although when you're caregiving for a child, for a mentally ill person, any of that is very sapping. Many of the researches that we have done, we have identified broadly 3 areas which seem to, create issues for the caregiver. One of them is stigma, one of them is burden, and one of them is burnout. Stigma, I think, is best answered by public awareness programs, by, making, even in literature, even in popular literature, which is why I chose to start writing a lot in Marathi. The understanding of various conditions, whether they are Alzheimer-like conditions, or as you said, FTDs, frontotemporal temporal dementias, or other serious psychological issues, not necessarily of a psychotic nature. Like there could be obsessive compulsive disorders, depression, and so on. So public awareness takes a lot away from stigma, and people do become, lay people around you do become more understanding and empathic. As far as dealing with burnout is concerned, I think mainly it is counseling and trying to get the caregiver to express their own feelings and, ventilate and allow for all that suppressed sorrow and grief for their loved one, as well as there can also be anger sometimes at, much of their life being taken away in caregiving activities. I remember one case I looked at where a young woman had a very physically disabled older sister with cerebral palsy. She loved her a lot. And then after about reaching younger sister. So this young woman was in her 20s and the patient was about 16. So the child with cerebral palsy died after a particular age, I think 16 or 17. And this older sister came to me with tremendous anger. my assumption initially in my mind had been that was she feeling that sibling rivalry, which a lot of healthy siblings of people with physical disabilities, but it was not that. It was anger that her parents have gone back to living a normal, satisfying life, and she kept thinking they've forgotten my sister. So there is so much of unexpressed feelings which need to be expressed somewhere, and that causes the burnout. But to come back to what you mentioned, I think it's basically caregiver burden. For the affluent families, there are options like appointing caregivers or paid caregivers. For families which can't afford that kind of help, as we discussed and as was said in the questions, it does fall often on the women. And that's where we have found caregiver support groups to be immensely useful because they share ideas in terms of what I did, which helped my father, or, little tips that they share with each other. Also, many times they, find like surrogates, like they want to go out somewhere or they have a doctor's appointment. So somebody from the neighborhood will come in and help because they know that tomorrow, if I have a need, this person will come and help. So these kind of informal networks that get planned, that get formed because of support groups. So I think that's a very powerful way in which to address the issue. And fortunately, it doesn't need like a whole lot of monetary support or whatever. It can be formed in the locality, in the community where all the caregivers hail from. But I think in IPH, at least very often we start off with a newspaper article. So we write in the local press and we talk about the issue and we say this is a crying need. So people who have the need to join a support group like this may approach us. So we just become the instrument where people can come together. We offer the space and then people come and meet. I hope that answers your question partially, but I know it's a very, very difficult and fraught area to address.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Can I say something, please?
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
please.
There is a very nice blog by Professor R.S. Murthy.
Yes.
The link is myemotionalhealthin.com. Professor R.S. Murthy is a renowned psychiatrist and a very well-known stalwart in the field of mental health. And he has actually started, he's a cancer survivor, and he retired from NIMHANS and now works at various levels. And he actually started this for cancer survivors and their family. But if you look at this myemotionalhealthin.com, there are various resources how for the caregivers, for the cancer patients, for the survivors, and especially for caregivers, there is a section where you will see loads and loads of useful resources which will really help you in terms of physical health, in terms of mental health, how to take care of oneself while we are taking care of a family member, and how to take care of ourselves, how to help prevent burnout to some extent. So it might be useful. Thank you.
I agree. Thank you, Dr.
so much,
Meenu.
ma'am.
Dr. R. Srinivas Murthy from NIMHANS, as you said, has also worked on the world stage. He has internationally represented psychiatry across the world. He also works a lot with special children, and he's an inspiration because he also dabbled a lot in community radio. And I think that is one more channel, very often, like the person who asked the question, very often the caregiver is also tied down to the home because they can't move out too much, leaving their loved one. So this kind of a channel, with social media linkages, community radio linkages, that works very well for them if that can be started. I remember one of his quotes, which I like very much. The special children and their problems are too important to be left to the professional, he says. So, we need the families to step in.
Dr. Vibhuti, can I give a small example,
Yeah.
but from a completely different context?
Yeah, please go ahead.
It is not a direct response to caregiver burden at all. I actually am researching caregiver burden using large-scale data surveys, but all this came to us from the palliative care network.
Excellent.
Okay, and in the palliative care network, especially for people who have fallen down and injured and are bedridden, and people who have mental health problems, the Northern Neighborhood Network for Palliative Care had an excellent system. It's a publicly supported. I have to say publicly supported, but I don't mean government. A network, which now the government has adopted. And the Institute of Palliative Medicine continues to train volunteers. Okay. It's a 6-hour or 8-hour training of local level volunteers who then step in to help the families in caregiving, both the physical and mental. So it's voluntary. Everybody feels good. Nobody is required to give more than 2 hours a week. But it forms a very strong supportive network for a caregiver. And that is like a public initiative. It is not, see, the premises cannot we collectively as a society help, because the prevalence of these conditions and caregiver burden comes only for a small number.
Yep.
So cannot the 10 people form a safety network around that person to, give that person 2 hours off a day or
Very good,
things
very
like that,
good.
which really reduce the burden. And that example comes from palliative care network. I know that all the solutions which madam has just now suggested calls for initiative, but as a public health person, no, I feel
At a
there
macro
has to be
level.
at a macro level also,
Very
there has to be a state's
responsible.
compassionate gaze on these people.
Correct, correct.
That is why I'm giving this another example. I know that it doesn't solve any problem for the madam who asked the question, but I want us to start thinking that those of us working in these issues, we should also lobby for, bigger level intervention.
No, in the way we have said that gender-based violence is a public health concern, same way mental health is a serious public health concern. It can't be just kept in back burner. No, that's that kind of a education we have to give and demand from the state accountability.
And ma'am, 5 years back, we were beginning to talk about psychological first aid. And suddenly now, nobody is talking about it.
Psychological?
First aid.
Yes, correct. During COVID time.
Yeah. Just before Corona started, now people were starting to talk about psychological first aid.
Yeah.
And now suddenly there is no talk
Psychological
about
first
it.
aid.
We were thinking about training students, training people at the grassroots
Yeah.
about how to provide immediate help, immediate psychological relief in the form of catharsis, how to convey support to a person who is suffering. Even little catharsis can help. How to
Correct.
convey support. We were talking about skills training, how to convey support to a person who is in distress. But now, in the last 3 years, 3.5 years, I haven't heard about psychological first aid at all.
Yeah. And that time we used to get public advisory also, no? That keep in touch with people, talk to your loved ones, those whom have not contacted, because now you are in isolation. So those kind of advisories, local cell governments were sending, no? That during the lockdown, so many advisories were dealing with the mental well-being. That has stopped now. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Subrajyoti ji, please go ahead.
So I think Dr. Anuradha touched on a very important topic, that's availability of materials, training materials in vernacular languages. I think that is the most important thing where everybody should concentrate in their own working areas, because when we are working in Bengal or in Maharashtra or in Uttar Pradesh, when we are going in the deepest of rural areas, there we need to develop, like Dr. Mala said, that about the scales. We don't have any proper scales to screen for mental health issues, gender-based violence questionnaires. We don't have any scales. So I think more energy should be given to developing, these kinds of scales, which is available in vernacular languages, training materials in vernacular language. This is very important. And thank you for touching that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One participant has asked for a link for the R.S. Murthy's website. Yeah. So, Meenuji, if you can share the
Ji.
Snehal Neilji, do you want to ask your question now? Okay, we have Chitra Ayarji. Would you like to ask your question?
Yeah. I just wanted, when we were talking about Ashas, helping the rural communities, the community women about mental health issues and all. But I was just wondering, what if the Asha herself is undergoing some mental health issue? Yeah, that's true.
Snehal ji, please go ahead. You raised your hand.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
I think it's an important question, and Ashas themselves need a lot of support for just one reason, that the health system overworks them and they don't belong to the health system also. And they are from the community and they constantly feel so responsible for the community and with very minimal resources, because the health system thinks they are volunteers. The community thinks that they belong to health system. They have a commitment. They have very less resources. So yes, for sure, we need to support the ASHA workers, but that again, we cannot do on our own. The health system needs to wake up to the phenomenal burden they are putting them through.
Correct.
Hello?
Yes.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
We need to lobby for all these things.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Very, very fruitful session. Extremely. Yeah.
Thank you. If there are no more questions, then I would like to invite Professor Vibhuti Patel ji to give the closing remarks.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Professor Mala Ramanathan ji. This was truly enlightening. I'm over to you.
Yeah. All three experts were excellent. They shared such valuable learnings that we got today because of their testimonies and the storytelling style with Dr. Mala Ramanathan, and also all three of them use the storytelling style, and stories always touch your heart and you will never forget them. So what all of them also emphasized was the need for a culture-specific approach in counseling, respect for basic human rights that demands that counselors or service providers address the issues concerning cultural mindset, behavioral variety, gender stereotypes that we have, and women's mental health responses are determined by this socio-cultural problems. And if this variety is not appreciated, counseling will end up being reductionist and homogenizing. Here, software is not formal education, but it is life. And I think that's why the quotation of, I think, Dr. Sovani was very useful, that you can't leave it to the elderly care, can't be left to the professional. You need a family, community, and the friends to play a central role. So mental health of women victims and survivors of tragedy demands multifaceted approach. Individual counseling by professional counselors can be helpful in breaking ice, and at the same time, women with similar experiences, I think the experiences of self-help groups where people come together and empower each other by narrating their own problem areas and also collectively putting their heads together to find solution is a very, very important. Another very important fact that came out was that patriarchal biases of mental health establishments. The mainstream mental health professionals obsessed about biomedical intervention. They are unable to impart required counseling to women or due to misogyny. In fact, counseling is time consuming. You have to give quality time to the people. So community-based approach is far more effective. And the stereotypical understanding about women's role in the family and society that governs their psyche. And if the so-called quote-unquote mentally ill woman, she doesn't fit into the mold, she is declared socially incompetent woman. So the witch hunting that we see, one thing which has not been discussed so far, and I think we very much wanted a session on that those sexual minorities, LGBTQIA community, the tremendous psychological stress that they have to face, not only from the outsiders, but their own biological family, and the witch hunting that happens of the sexual minorities, either lesbians and gays, even by the mainstream psychiatrists. is so strong that even All India Institute of Medical Science has a specific package for counseling to correct deviant behavior. So what we call deviant, I think that also needs to be unpacked, and I'm sure it will come up in tomorrow's session. So subordination, domination relation, wherever they are existing. So these power relations, I think they are the ones which are creating so much of stress, and we need to, in the larger macro level, we also need to challenge this kind of unequal relation and empower the marginalized. So that's what happened. We started with intersectional approach, ended with so many examples of the variety of experiences that we have among different socioeconomic societies, as well as the geographical location where you have a matrilineage versus patrilineage, the kind of patriarchy is constructed, social construction of gender relations, how they play very important role in determining the wellness or illness, we would say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Snehalji, if you would like to ask your question, please go ahead.
Sneha is already asked, no?
No, I think ma'am was trying to raise her hand and unmute. In that case, I think I will move ahead to the closing, to the thank you note. So we are truly grateful for all who've been part of today's event. With day 2 coming to a close, we eagerly anticipate your return for day 3, where we have presentations by Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Dr. Varundhini Kankipati ji, and Mr. Sangeeta Regge ji. As we come to an end of day 2 of Gender and Mental Health, an online international winter school program, a 3-day immersive online certificate training course, I, Ramanathan Arora, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI Gender Impact Study Center. We are grateful to our experts for day 2, Professor Vibhuti Patel ji, Dr. Cicilia Chettiar ji, Professor Anuradha Sovani ji, and Professor Mala Ramanathan ji, for taking out their valuable time and giving an opportunity to the participants to learn from this online certificate program. We thank all of our participants today who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberations. Readings for the sessions have been shared in your email, and a video of the session will also be shared with you for learning. We look forward to seeing you for our 3rd day of the certification course on 15th February at 6 p.m. We are grateful if you're watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in at future IMPRI Web Policy Talk and Web Policy Learning events. Wishing you a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Vibhuti. Thank you, IMPRI.
All 3 of you were so brilliant.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.